Welcome to our viewers in the UK and around the world for a day of special coverage following the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Britain's longest-serving monarch died peacefully on Thursday afternoon at the age of 96 at her Scottish estate of Balmoral. The crown was immediately passed on to her eldest son and heir, who will be formally proclaimed king on Saturday morning and will reign as Charles III. Well, after spending the night at Balmoral, the King is now back in London for a series of important engagements. The next few hours, he will have an audience with the Prime Minister, Liz Truss. King Charles will then make his first televised address to the nation as a monarch. That's expected at 6 p.m. London time or 1700 GMT. After the King's address, a public service of remembrance will be held at St Paul's Cathedral. The Prime Minister and the Mayor of London are expected to attend. Let's go now to our correspondent Helena Wilkinson, who's at the royal residence at Windsor Castle, a favourite place for the Queen to stay for her, and a favourite place for King Charles too. And behind you, continuing burgeoning crowds paying their respects following the death of the Queen.
Yes, and I'm sure that the King and the other members of the royal family will take great comfort, won't they, from what they are seeing, not just here in Windsor, but at Buckingham Palace and at other royal residences and across the world. The outpouring of grief, support for the royal family after the death of Her Majesty the Queen. We are situated at the castle end of the Long Walk, Cambridge Gate just behind us, you can see, and they have come in their thousands here today. Not only locals but tourists as well, and you walk through the crowds of people, you can hear people sharing stories, keeping the memories of Her Majesty alive. And it's also poignant really when you read some of the notes that are attached to some of those bouquets, and thousands have been left here. Some of those notes really give you an idea of the sorrow and the grief that people are feeling. One simply thanked the Queen for her dedication to service throughout her reign. Well, let's speak to one person who has travelled, I think, 3 hours or so, Jenny, to be here. And you're here with your mum and your daughter called Elizabeth after the Queen.
Yeah, I've called her Elizabeth just because the Queen's such an inspirational lady, her dedication and service that she's shown us all of her life, even through till 2 days ago. You know, she's worked incredibly hard, and we just felt it was right to come to her favourite place just to remember her today.
And so you travelled for about 3 hours this morning with your 2-year-old daughter. I know it's an obvious question really, but what is it that drew you to come here in particular?
Just the fact that it's the Queen's favourite place. It's so beautiful. It's such a lovely place. You know, the castle's beautiful, and the Long Walk in particular. You know, we came to the castle in August this year, and we looked through the windows of the castle and saw this amazing view, and it just feels quite, appropriate to show our respect to the Queen in this way.
And what are the qualities that you admired in the Queen?
I think her dedication to service. You know, she didn't put a foot wrong in her 96 years of life, and it's just phenomenal how, that never complain, never explain mantra that she had, it worked, and we've all respect her, and she's just done a phenomenal job, not just for our country but for the Commonwealth and worldwide.
And you've named your daughter Elizabeth after the Queen. I mean, what will you be telling her? She's 2 years old now, so quite little still. But what will you be carrying on the memories that you hold about the Queen and tell your daughter about her?
Certainly. Again, the role model that the Queen has been for all of us. I want our little Betty, our Elizabeth, to know all about that as well, and to grow up with the morals that the Queen has shown us all.
And just finally, Jenny, I mean, we lots of people have come here like you today. How does it feel to be here today?
Quite overwhelming. The outpouring of love that has been shown for the Queen is really quite overwhelming, and it feels quite peaceful too, that, onto a new era, but we need to mourn and we need to grieve someone that's very well loved.
All right, Jenny, thank you very much. I know you've got some flowers that you're going to lay. Thank you very much. Jenny, just one of the thousands of people, as I say, Clive, who are here today at the castle. The flowers, we are told by Buckingham Palace here outside the gates. A bit later on this evening, they will be moved to inside the castle grounds. You may remember after the Duke of Edinburgh died, they did the same thing. They gathered all the flowers every evening and took them and placed them on the grass outside St George's Chapel, which is inside the grounds of Windsor Castle. But the locals here are feeling the loss very deeply. They very much saw the Queen as one of their neighbours. The castle is in the centre of the Windsor town, and I think for them it will take them quite a long time to come to the realisation that when they look at the castle up behind us, there won't be a Queen there, she won't be returning, and I think that's going to be very difficult for people, locals who live here, who were very fond of Her Majesty.
It will indeed be a strange new world that we're all entering. Helena, thank you. Helena Wilkinson there live at Windsor. The King, we've got to get used to saying that now, the King and the Queen Consort, they're back in London, of course, in residence at Buckingham Palace. But the drama and the sadness began hundreds of miles further north in Scotland, of course, at Balmoral Castle. And my colleague Kirsty Wark is at the Queen's estate at Balmoral, where Her Majesty passed away. Kirsty, perhaps Balmoral is no longer the fulcrum of events involving all of this now, but given the royal family's affinity with Scotland and all those people still gathering behind you, I see, at the gates of Balmoral, still an important aspect to this story, and there may still be royals there too, I think.
Yes, I think what you see behind me is almost in marked contrast to what was happening at Buckingham Palace, because hundreds of people have been coming forwards and backwards all day, laying flowers, making tributes, but there is an air of real peace and respect and dignity. People remembering that it is less than 24 hours since we heard that the Queen had passed away. And I think people are coming here simply to be close to her. There's a great feeling here that this was a place that she loved deeply. You know, she's on Royal D-side. This is where her family at some of its happiest times. And yes, members of the royal family have been here, and some of them have now gone. I'm joined now by Sarah Campbell, the royal correspondent. Sarah, there's been some movement today about, obviously we now know that the King and the Queen Consort have left, but other members of the family have been arriving.
Yes, there's been, so Prince Harry and Prince William, her grandsons, who arrived yesterday, they left over the course of the morning. But just in the last hour, more grandchildren have arrived. So that would be Zara Tyndall, Princess Anne's daughter, and Beatrice and Eugenie, Prince Andrew's two daughters. We know, of course, that Prince Andrew is here. He arrived yesterday on a flight along with Edward and Sophie, the Earl and Countess of Wessex, and they were here along with the new King and the Queen Consort, and spent the night overnight. So really, it was a very private moment, I think, overnight.
And it still feels very private here. It still feels that we are in just the hours of aftermath of the Queen's passing. And I also think for people that work in Balmoral Castle and for people from Braemar, where the Queen often went about, it is a profound sadness because they saw another side of the Queen, and they have many memories of her.
Yeah. There will be sort of two groups, if you like, of people that have been working with the Queen. There are those who travel with her, who will have worked with her for years and years, and we've heard that they are, of course, as you'd expect, deeply, deeply upset today. But as you say, there are I've been hearing the sort of preparations for the Queen arriving, and there's a whole army of people who spend, a lot of their lives, a lot of their summer getting the big house ready, and they really look forward to her being here. And she's been so often, she, of course, and Prince Philip spent many summers here, and it was a place that they could relax, that they could be themselves. And
it was their home.
It was their home, exactly, their private home. And also I think there was a great deal of understanding between the local people and them, that they didn't treat them any differently. You know, there was just an acceptance that you might see the Queen out and about, but that's because you lived here.
And of course, you know, this has been a place for the royal family since the mid-1800s, when Prince Albert built Balmoral from local granite from the estate. So there's a feeling of real roots and depth here. And it, of course, has been a place of some of the saddest times of the Queen. It was here in 1997 that she was with Prince William and Harry when she learned of Diana, Princess of Wales's death.
Yeah, a real place of refuge over the years when they've needed it. But it's such a beautiful place, and when we've been here today, the sun's been there's been a lot of rain, but the sun has also been shining, and you can see why you would want to spend time here. 50,000 acres of the most beautiful countryside. It was the First Minister, wasn't it Nicola Sturgeon, who said that she hoped it would be of some comfort to her loved ones, that she would have spent her final days in a place that she obviously cherished.
And it was here that she came in the aftermath of Prince Philip's death to mourn and to have some solitude as well. And also the idea that here there's been such happiness and actually fun. You know, the stories are legion. When heads of state come, when prime ministers come, I think they've been sometimes taken aback by having to roll up their sleeves on picnics and be told by the Queen, you know, you wash, I dry.
Yeah.
And it seems to me it's been the way that she's put them at their ease.
Yeah, exactly right. And we don't get to see that often on camera, but for that royal family documentary from 1969, there's those wonderful scenes of the family by the side of the loch, preparing the barbecue, the Queen's rolling her sleeves up, testing the salad dressing, you know, the Tupperware boxes are out. So it was a chance for normality, I think, and sort of to strip away the palaces. This was a place that, as you say, was home.
And I think it's very important in Scotland. She was the Queen of Scots, you know, she opened the Scottish Parliament, and that people feel a great respect. I think that in Scotland it's not so much deference, but it's deep, deep respect. And you saw that with some of the letters and messages that have been left, you know, apart from the Robert Burns programme, My Heart is in the Highlands. You've seen a lot from people near and far today.
Yeah, and I mean, I've had a chance to speak to some of the people, and people are close to tears. It's a very emotional time. One lady that I spoke to said she'd always remember her smile. She'd driven from Perth to come and lay flowers. Other people have you know, come from far and wide. There's a lovely section of flowers. It smells beautiful over there now. The fragrance from all those flowers. There's a corgi over there, of course. There's also a Paddington bear. People sort of remembering that wonderful moment from the Jubilee weekend where she did that skit, you know, with Paddington Bear, a different side again of the Queen.
And also, I think, you know, in her latter years, we saw much more in a way of that side of the Queen, who apparently had a hugely dry wit in private, but actually she was prepared in a way to just relax towards the end of her life.
Yeah, and ironically, because of COVID and because we didn't have the engagements outside, there were a lot of Zoom calls, and so the microphone was a lot closer. So in a way, we did get to know the Queen a little bit better in the last couple of years, because you could hear her speak and she would make jokes with the people on these Zoom calls with. So yeah, absolutely.
And I think this idea that there is a great deal of privacy here today for the members of the royal family were here, and I can remember actually after the Queen Mother's death, it was here to this estate, but to Burke Hall, that Prince Charles came for a period of reflection and mourning. And that, you know, it's very important that we give the royal family space. Of course, you know, the King and the Queen Consort are very much the front end of all this, but actually there's a great deal of people in the royal family for whom this is a very dreadfully sad moment.
Absolutely, of course. And one wonders how it must feel for the new King, King Charles III, to have this sort of dichotomy that he's going down, people are shaking his hands, celebrating the fact that he's the new king, but it's not yet 24 hours since his mother died.
And of course what will happen is that, as far as we know, you know, Balmoral will continue over the next 2 or 3 days to be a focus for Her Majesty. And it seems so fitting that, in fact, that these people are here, they think they're close to her, and that actually this is where she spent her final hours as well.
Absolutely, and what a beautiful place to spend your final hours. I think that's the sense that Nicola Sturgeon was saying, that the comfort that her family will hopefully have, that it's a place they all love, and the Queen in particular.
And she had a great fondness for the people of Scotland as well. Clive, coming back to you just now in the studio.
OK, Kirsty, thank you, and to Sarah as well, many thanks there in Balmoral. Sir David Attenborough has joined other influential figures in paying tribute to the Queen. The environmentalist and broadcaster was knighted by Her Majesty in 1985 and has a long history and strong relationship with the royal family. Sir David and the Queen had known each other for many years, with the broadcaster producing the Queen's annual televised Christmas Day address in the 1980s and 90s.
The Queen had an extraordinary ability to put you at your ease. If there was a technical hitch, she wanted to know what it was, and if it had a funny side, she was quick to see the joke. Yet not for 1 second could you forget that you were in the presence of someone who had willingly accepted enormous responsibilities and dedicated her life to serving the nation. That you were, in short, in the presence of royalty. The whole nation is bereaved.
And one wonders what counsel perhaps Sir David Attenborough will be able to offer to the new king. We know that he has causes like sustainability and farming and climate change and the environment and so on very close to his heart. How much of that will be expressed in the way that he rules? Sir David Attenborough there with his reflections on the Queen. The King and the Queen Consort, they are back in London. We saw them on walkabout outside Buckingham Palace, and our home editor, Mark Easton, is there. We can talk to you now, Mark. The King always relaxed, walking a line of well-wishers, shaking hands, and he even got a peck on the cheek from one member of the public. He seems very comfortable in his new role.
This was a huge moment. Don't forget that, because this was the first time that the new king met his people on that line outside Buckingham Palace. Interesting that he drove to the gates of the palace but didn't drive in. He stopped. His first job that he felt as soon as he got to what will now be his home at Buckingham Palace was to leave the car and go and meet his people. And he met them in a very direct way. As you were saying, he was kissed on the hand, he was kissed on the cheek by one woman. His hands were grabbed. He was involved in conversations throughout this very long walkabout, as perhaps we ought to call it. But it was for him, I think, an opportunity to say, here I am your king. And it was interesting too that one of his personal security guards, who were right beside him while he was doing all of this, was saying to the crowd, phones down, enjoy the moment. Because I think what they were trying to say was they wanted to demonstrate, to illustrate this direct connection between King Charles III and the people that he now rules.
You're right, Mark. I mean, he's trying to set a tone there, isn't he? You know, right at the beginning of his reign, one of inclusion, one that shows him out with his people. And that tone, I suppose, he will want to reflect in that very important nationwide address, his first as king, of course, which he's going to be giving in about 3 hours or so, we understand, setting that tone of an inclusive monarch, just like his mum.
Absolutely. He's recording that speech probably right now in the blue drawing room in Buckingham Palace behind me. There will be an official photographer in there as well to get the official photograph of that. So the speech will have been finalised and is being recorded, as I say, in the blue drawing room at Buckingham Palace. And that, of course, is going to be a huge opportunity for us to learn a lot more about who King Charles III is. We've known the person, but not as king, of course, and how he intends to rule. And I think you're absolutely right, Clive. That first little moment, that glimpse we had of him walking the line in front of Buckingham Palace, he was incredibly approachable. He was one of the people in a way, in a very, very different tone perhaps to that of his mother. But this is a huge job. Let's not forget that, because although the crowds here, of course, the people who've gathered outside Buckingham Palace will be very largely supporters of the monarchy and will be royalists, but there was a moment when we just wondered, how will they greet the new monarch? And in fact, what we heard was cheers. We heard people singing "God Save the King." We heard people shouting "Long live the King! God save the King!" throughout the arrival of the King and during the walkabout. Then someone actually sang "God Save the King" and got quite a few other members of the crowd to join in. So I think in all of that we are seeing the importance that the monarchy puts on making that connection with the people, because Charles is a very different individual as a new monarch to his mother, who was very young, hardly known, and had no real backstory in a sense. For Charles, there is a huge backstory, 70 odd years of backstory, and that, I think, makes it more difficult for him, because people have made up their minds about King Charles in a way that they never had about Queen Elizabeth when she came to the throne in 1952. So this moment today, just a short time ago in front of Buckingham Palace, was hugely important for King Charles and for the monarchy. How would the people react in that first moment? And I think we can say that they will be delighted. There was sympathy shown to the King for the loss of his mother, of course, but there was also, I think, a real welcome from the people who are here to their new king, and a sense that the monarchy goes on and we have a new king who will be their ruler until such time as he dies.
Okay, Mark, thank you. Mark Easton there, making that really interesting and important point that we shouldn't forget. The Queen, of course, was in her mid-20s when she became Queen, and her son, the King, Charles III, in his 70s. So how does that colour, perhaps, the way that we look at the monarchy from now on? Welcome to our viewers in the UK and around the world for a day of special coverage following the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Britain's longest serving monarch died peacefully on Thursday afternoon at the age of 96 at her Scottish estate of Balmoral. The crown was immediately passed on to her eldest son and heir, who will be formally proclaimed king on Saturday morning and will reign as Charles III. After spending the night at Balmoral, the king is now back in London for a series of important engagements. In the next few hours, he'll have an audience with the Prime Minister, Liz Truss. King Charles will then make his first televised address to the nation as a monarch. That's expected around 6 p.m. London time. And after the speech, a public service of remembrance will be held at St Paul's Cathedral. The Prime Minister and the Mayor of London are expected to attend. Let's talk to our World Affairs editor, John Simpson, who's here. John, as always, it's a pleasure to see you. And I just wonder what your reflections are on a global scale, given I was talking to Steve Rosenberg, Moscow editor, Russia editor today. Vladimir Putin sent his condolences.
And very nicely phrased, too. I mean, to be honest, I imagine that in the middle of fighting a rather difficult war, Putin didn't have much time to go through the document, which must have been drawn up, I should think, years ago. It sounded like it dated back to the time when relations with Britain were actually
a little bit better.
Yeah, were a lot. And I suppose the word must have come through. They must have looked at what they'd got and thought, well, you know, maybe it's a little bit warm, but let's send it off anyway. We've got lots of other things to do. But it was very warm. And the Chinese were a little bit more proper and short and brief. But I've been quite surprised by the warmth that's come through. You know, how the French have reacted, not just the president, not just the top politicians, but ordinary people, as though it was kind of not quite their queen, but something pretty close. And I think a lot of countries have felt that.
Why do you think that is? I'm fascinated by this. Yes, there was the Commonwealth, and we can perhaps understand that level of affection and warmth coming from members of the Commonwealth and the 15 or so countries that the Queen was the sovereign of, and the territories, many more, within the Commonwealth itself. But France, America, all these countries showing an affection that is really quite astonishing. And republics. France, of course, we know what they did with their royal family. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think in some cases, I mean, you know, you can make out a case. I've read various cases by psychologists and so on, that people actually do like the notion of a monarch, especially if it's not theirs, and especially if there's a sense of warmth and dignity and attraction. You don't have to have the Queen's head on your coins or on your banknotes to feel that she does represent something. I mean, when you look at all the EU countries, I think just about all of them, today, the warmth that comes through there, in Spain, for instance, particularly strong. They've got a monarch of their own, but a monarch that's not always been as popular as the Queen has. And also, there's another factor. We have to say, I think, that one of the reasons why the Queen has been so intensely popular in this country is because we all have kind of bought into the fact of her reign. Most of us, the majority, not I, were born actually during the Queen's reign. And the same is true just about 3 or 4 degrees below, right throughout Europe, right throughout the Commonwealth, right throughout the world. The sense that she's always been there, and therefore she kind of, you know, there's a sense that our lives are somehow attached to her. She represents her death, sadly, represents the passing of something for just about everybody, I would say.
We're just looking at some of the pictures there from Windsor. Oh no, we've now jumped to Buckingham Palace. But you know, the standard there, flying at half-mast, almost. I just wonder, John, what the global reaction will be then to Charles III.
Well, he'll have to establish a kind of persona for himself outside the country as he has to inside the country. And of course, everybody knows about him for the reasons that we were hearing. I mean, he's been, as it were, the king in waiting for a very, very long time. And people have made their minds up about him long, long ago. But he has to now create, I think, the atmosphere around himself of a British king. And he doesn't have the advantages, some of the advantages that the Queen has. He's got other advantages that she didn't have. I mean, he's a much younger man than she was. He's of a much more recent era, even though, you know, at 73, he's not a young man any longer. But he does have the views and attitudes of somebody who is younger, and that's a real advantage, I think. I just think he's going to have to make his way. And, you know, the great thing about the Queen was that she travelled everywhere. There weren't really many heads of state that she didn't know, heads of government and state that she hadn't met at some stage. And that's really important, I think. And he'll have to do the same thing as king.
Indeed. Indeed. Well, he's learnt from the best. John, many thanks. John Simpson, our World Affairs editor there. We brought you a little snatch of some of the pictures from Buckingham Palace there. The Royal Standard fluttering in the wind, high above the building. And I think we can join my colleague, Joanna Gosling, who's also there. Hi, Joanna. The King, as the Standard suggests, is now in residence.
He is, yes. And when he arrived, it felt like a really important moment, actually, because we saw that moment when he got out of his car and he greeted the large crowd here behind us, and he took his time as he walked from one end of the crowd to the other, and he seemed very relaxed, and he held hands, he was kissed on the cheek, and it felt like a key moment because, of course, there is going to be so much ceremony around these days as he transitions to this new role, as we all digest the passing of the Queen and look now to King Charles III. But one of the key factors of his role going forward is, of course, connecting with the public. That's what it's about. And the Queen held that incredibly special place in people's hearts, and that is something that the floral tributes that we see here and elsewhere, and the people who have just come out in the rain last night, in the sunshine today, to remember her, who've left tributes here, talking about their gratitude for her service, 70 years of service. And they remember her, and as I say, they're going to be looking now to King Charles III. So he's now inside Buckingham Palace, and as you mentioned, Clive, the royal standard now at full mast. The Union flag was lowered to half mast. The Union standard, the royal standard is never lowered to half mast, so it was the Union flag, and now with the new monarch in position there in Buckingham Palace, it's been raised to full mast. Let me bring in our home editor, Mark Easton. It was a real moment, wasn't it, Mark? I mean, he took his time to meet the crowd. He was very relaxed, and it was that moment of connection with the new monarch and the people.
It was a very deliberate act. He stopped the car before it went through the gates to the other side of the railings, beyond where the public can go. He was in public space. He got out of the car and went straight to the people. He shook hands. He held people's hands. He allowed people. One woman kissed him on the hand. Another, as you say, kissed him on the cheek. He was approachable. You could, I mean, he's an old hand at, you know, doing the line. But this was his first public appearance as king. And that really, really matters, because the country is looking at every detail. And that particular moment had a very important message for the country, that he was going to be king in a way where he was with the people. He was in the people's space, and he was allowing the people to be with him. I think the metaphor that lay behind that walkabout is incredibly important, and it will have been talked about a lot. How are we going to do this? It was interesting that one of the security people who was with Charles is encouraging people to put down their phones, because, well, you know what it's like. You know, you can spend your time seeing the world through a mobile phone. And he was suggesting that actually they need to connect with the moment. But it's good advice anyway. But I think it's particularly important for King Charles right now that he looks at people straight in the face, and is seen doing so, because he wants to make a point about the kind of king that he is going to be. And we will learn a lot more later. You know, he's recording his message that he's going to be delivering to the nation this evening. Right now, we suspect, in the Blue Drawing Room in Buckingham Palace. People were going through every word of that, no doubt, to try and understand how he intends to govern as king. But we did get some clues. And I think that we are seeing a man comfortable, as you say, but also determinedly saying, I am with you. Whatever your background, whoever you are, I am with you, and I am touchable, actually.
And when they got out of the car, Camilla actually got out first, the Queen Consort. She then stepped back. We didn't actually then see her on camera as he went along greeting the people, and then, of course, the two of them walked through those doors together. She won't have a constitutional role, will she? But, of course, she is by his side as Queen Consort, which is what the Queen said she wanted.
Yes, a very, very important role. Of course, the Queen had Prince Philip, her liege man, you know, and he did stand 2 paces traditionally behind her. And there will be something of that role, obviously, for the Queen Consort. I think it was interesting that this was the King's moment. It was not a couple, as they have been so many times before. He was on his own, in his own way, with his own title, as king. It wasn't about her, it was about him. And that was really, really important. And we're going to see this a lot. I mean, obviously they are, a couple, and we will see them together an enormous amount. But now he is king. It will be interesting, actually, to see, to what extent she does take those 2 steps back. Will she show the kind of deference that we know, certainly in public, Prince Philip showed to his wife, Queen Elizabeth, throughout their relationship? A difficult role for her, actually. But and people will be watching closely because, to some she's quite a controversial figure. But nevertheless, I think it will be really, really interesting to see how she behaves, where she places herself when the king is being king.
And of course, there are absolutely constitutional constraints around what they will be able to say, what they will be able to do.
Absolutely.
And they've both been figureheads of organisations. He has been outspoken on issues he cares about deeply. Do they completely step back from all of that now? I think
they will. I mean, it'll be interesting. We don't know quite what kind of king Charles wants to be or will be, but I think it must be. We must assume that now he is king, he takes on the responsibilities of a king, and one of those is that essentially he doesn't have a view on anything. We obviously know he's got views, and some things he feels very strongly, but as king he has to be impartial on all matters, certainly in matters of politics, and the same to a very great degree will apply to the Queen Consort Camilla. So yes, it's a huge change for both of them, and they're going to just have to get used to it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Mark. And of course, there is a lot that is going to be going on there in Buckingham Palace. We know that King Charles III is going to be addressing the nation at 6 o'clock, and prior to that he will also be meeting the Prime Minister. So the start of the Carolean era, and it's begun with an awful lot for him to do. Back to you.
Joanna, thank you. Look at those crowds behind you as well. I mean, remarkable, absolutely remarkable. And similar scenes, one suspects, at another royal residence, and that is, of course, at Windsor. Our correspondent Helena Wilkinson is there for us now. I see a chap there with the Union flag draped in that. We saw the outpouring of affection and warmth for King Charles III at Buckingham Palace, and similar sentiments one expects where you are, Helena.
Yes, absolutely, Clive, and there will be no doubt that the King, and we will have to take time to get used to calling Charles King, will take great comfort from the outpouring of support that we are seeing at Buckingham Palace, as you said, here at Windsor Castle. This was a place that the Queen was happy to call her home. She spent the last 2.5 years here, calling it her residence. She worked out of here. You'll remember she spent lockdown with the Duke of Edinburgh here, and it was a place she was very happy to be. It was a lot of green space around here, the great park to ride her horses, and it's become a focal point, as you would expect, for people to come and pay their respects, and they have come today in their thousands. Tourists, locals, people have travelled from far to come here and lay flowers, and you walk through the crowds and you can hear the stories about the Queen, the memories that people are keeping alive about Her Majesty. Well, let's have a chat with 2 people who've come here today, Michael and Alison. Where have you come from today?
We come from Kent.
From Kent.
Yes.
And what brought you here? I know it sounds like an obvious question, but tell me why you wanted to come here.
We wanted to show our respects after hearing the unfortunate news of the Elizabeth, the Queen, and we wanted to come and have a look at the flowers and say a few prayers.
Michael, you're here today. How does it feel being here with so many people who've come like you?
It feels strange because so many people here. It's quite quiet. It's very quiet, and it's just sort of like, it's lovely to see sort of everybody coming together to show their respects, really.
And lots of people sharing their memories of the Queen.
Yeah.
What are the things that you remember about her, or you liked about the Queen?
Her smiling face. She always had a smile on her face, and she was just like, I was thinking about it yesterday, sort of like she was probably everybody's second mum. You know, she was just there for everybody, really. She's such a nice person.
Yeah, I mean, that's something we've heard quite a bit from people, that they felt like she was a family member, like a grandmother or a mother. Alison, what about you?
All the way through I was growing up, I watched the London Palladium, and the Queen's always there, and it was just always happy times when, you know, she has supported the public and the country. And again, she always has a smile on her face. And I was just in complete shock when I heard the news. In tears. I just couldn't believe it.
We've seen in the last hour or so the King Charles, we'll have to get used to calling him King, walking around outside the palace. I mean, you think he'll take comfort from seeing so many people, as I say, not just here, not just in this country, but around the world supporting him?
Well, the Queen's had such a massive impact, and the royal family, to everybody across the globe, and I think he'll be very comforted, and the royal family, seeing all these lovely flowers and comments that people have put by on the ground there just in front of us, and I think he'll be very comforted by that.
And it's a huge change, isn't it, for the country?
Yeah, massive change, yeah. It's just like you say, she's been around for, was it 70 years? And then all of a sudden, you know, you've got somebody else coming in who's now going to rule the country and you know, other parts of the world. So it's going to be a massive change.
And just tell me where you were when you heard the news, and how did you feel?
So originally we were on a golfing trip, and we heard the news at our hotel room, and we were just in complete shock.
We sat and watched the TV when we sort of like heard about the family coming up to Balmoral. We just stayed in our room, we were glued to the TV, and then sort of like then you got the message, and it was just sort of like, it's so sad. It was so sad.
Very sad. Yeah.
A tear in my eye, I did anyway.
It's still shock. It's you know, but I know she's done very well at 96, and again, you know, she's going to live on in all of us.
It's going to take a lot
memories.
of getting used to. You know, everything you look at's got the Queen. You know, it's your money. It's everything. You know, she was just the one. You know, so sad.
She can't be replaced. That's the way it is.
All right, thank you both very much, Alice and Michael. Thank you for your time here this afternoon, and those thoughts really echoed by so many people here. I was reading some of the notes on some of the bouquets, and there are thousands of bouquets now just outside of the gate, and I think they really underline the support, the grief, the disbelief as well about the news about the Queen. One of the notes that I saw read that it thanked Her Majesty for her lifetime of dedication, and another one simply said she represented the best of us. The flowers here, Clive, what we expect to happen a bit later on this evening is they will be moved, they will be picked up, moved and taken to inside the grounds of Windsor Castle, laid outside of St George's Chapel, and that is expected to happen every evening because the number of bouquets, as I say, is growing and growing, and people still continuing to come here. Not just tourists, but locals who saw the Queen as one of their neighbours, and it is they who will feel the loss incredibly deeply.
One of her neighbours, Helena, she used to pop down to the local shops from time to time, we understand, and other members of the royal family as well. So entwined is the royal family in that wonderful city. Okay, Helena, thank you. Helena Wilkinson there. In Windsor. Kirsty Wark is at the Queen's estate at Balmoral in Scotland, where, of course, Her Majesty passed away. Kirsty, I was struck a little bit earlier by what you were saying there, that there's more of a sense of hush, a quiet contemplation, a seriousness, I suppose, some might suggest, because, of course, that is where the Queen passed.
That is where the Queen passed. This is where the Queen passed. And there's a very deep sense that, of course, the Queen is still here. And people are coming here, I think, to be close to her. And I mean, it's extraordinary. I've spoken to somebody who was here with their family, obviously in Scotland, and they came with a very elaborate bouquet from Las Vegas. People are coming from all over, and all manner of flowers, you know, irises, hydrangeas, sunflowers. And indeed, that is very fitting, because we understand that just last week, the Queen was with one of her gardeners here in the gardens at Balmoral, and of course, like many, many people, I think Her Majesty found great solace in the gardens. But of course, as well as people coming here, and they've been coming since early morning, they don't stay for long, they leave their flowers, and they very quietly move on, walk away, and we can see them coming across the bridge over the Dee where the Queen used to fish, coming in here and then leaving again. And I'm joined now by Sarah Campbell, our royal correspondent. It's not just members of the public coming from all over the world. There is an extraordinary amount of media here.
Yes, I think reflecting the fact that she is such a global figure, of course. I mean, I arrived here this morning at about 5:30, and the American networks were here already, the Australian networks, they've been broadcasting through the night. We are surrounded by them. There are channels in Germany, in France, that broke off their coverage of whatever they were doing at the time to announce the death of the British monarch. So just really clear what a figure she has been for so long, and for not just the UK but for across the world.
Of course, and it would be fair to say, and not chauvinistic, that I don't think that would have happened for any other member of the royal family, indeed any other head of state from around the world. And that is probably a tribute as much to the fact that she was determined to travel. She built the Commonwealth. She was determined to travel. She's the head of 15 countries.
Yeah, she's the most travelled monarch that we are aware of. Has travelled to almost all the members of the Commonwealth countries. So that's more than 50 countries. And some of these times she was away for sort of months on end. So travel, and I mean, her mantra wasn't it, you have to be seen to be believed, and she felt in order to do that she would have to travel. Of course, in her later years we've become used to her being in the UK because she stopped long-haul travel, and I think the last trip she made outside of the UK was in 2015 when she went back to Malta. So we've become used to her being here, but in the years before that, she travelled extensively.
And there's been so many different kinds of tributes, but one tribute was you carried out your vow of duty, service to the end. And of course, it's really important. And it's interesting that people have picked up on that here, particularly because it was a place where she greeted outgoing prime ministers and incoming prime ministers.
On Tuesday.
I mean, it's extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. And I think I was chatting to one lady who was very emotional. And I think her sense was that although she's 96, she's had deteriorating health. We've seen that over the last year. But I think it was the suddenness of it, even so, that we had this photograph of her on Tuesday in the drawing room in Balmoral. Yes, she looked frail, absolutely. But she was smiling, and she was determined clearly to keep carrying out her duty. And we understood that she was still doing red boxes. She was still reading the government papers, right up until the end. And that's extraordinary.
Yes, and apart from the picture with the incoming Prime Minister Liz Truss, there was also a picture of her standing alone with a firearm behind her, very much in the place where she felt most comfortable, most relaxed, and most at home.
And that was a lovely image, wasn't it? What a lovely
really
final image to have. And there have been images, and we know that Balmoral was a place that was incredibly close to her heart. She's had a connection here since she was a child. Of course, it's been connected to the royal family. It's one of the two private estates that they own. So it's that and Sandringham. And so every summer, she and Prince Philip would come, and they would arrive in July, mid-July, and leave in sort of beginning of October.
And they organised things like the Gillies Ball, they cooked, they did all these things, the Braemar Highland Games and so forth. But also it was a place of great imagery for her. I mean, the thing was that from a very young age, her beloved father, George VI, was tutoring her on what was going to happen. And of course, her great Scottish connection with her mother, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, meant that she was being prepared for her future here, and this was the place where she had the tranquility to do it.
Exactly, but also to maybe have the space to forget about the fact that she was a monarch for a time, and to just walk on the hills. And there was the image that I think I remember most clearly is when Prince Philip died, and it was the image that she chose from her personal collection, and it was that lovely image of her lying on a picnic blanket or sitting on a picnic blanket with Prince Philip, looking really relaxed, looking really happy. Photograph taken by Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, and just looking relaxed and like we all would do on holiday, with our partner. And I think that's what it gave her, some sort of normality in this extraordinarily beautiful surround.
And you almost can hear the silence and hear the reverence, but also the idea that people are very, in a way, comforted to be close to the Queen here.
Yeah, absolutely, and she is still here. I think you're right.
And that's very important.
That is, and I think that's why the sense here is very, very respectful. It's very calm. It's not maybe the scenes that we're seeing in Buckingham Palace.
No, and they're of a different order. But also, I was struck by all faiths and none being here today.
People from all over. There are people that have travelled from all parts of Scotland. I spoke to somebody at Perth, and literally, as you said, they're not spending long here.
No.
Literally want to just come, spend a few minutes with the flowers, reading some of the other cards, reading the other things that people have said, and then going, but clearly wanting to be in this place that's so associated with the Queen.
As I was coming in, I saw Buddhists, I saw Sikhs, there were all sorts of people here. It's also really important thinking about that. I think that she was a figure of great reconciliation, and for example in Ireland, a great figure of reconciliation there.
And I think she could do things, and people will say this about her, she could do things that politicians can't. They get voted in, they get voted out. She was such a constant, and people knew with the Queen that there was no agenda, there was no political allegiance, there was no political party. She was a great bringer together of people, and that's what they talk about the Commonwealth. It's a family of nations, it's a bringing people together, it's hoping that people can resolve problems by talking, and I think that's what she really felt was important.
Sarah, thank you very much. And now back to you, Clive.
Kirsty, thank you. Kirsty Wark there, and Sarah Campbell at Balmoral. It's being reported that President Biden is going to be potentially attending the Queen's funeral. There's no date as yet for that, of course. The reports are coming from local US media. Let's talk to our Washington correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue. Gary, no surprise this, one suspects, given the much vaunted special relationship and so on. But the President was also one of the first world leaders to offer his condolences to the royal family on the death of the Queen.
Yes, I mean, within really a couple of hours or so, they'd have made an arrangement to come here to the embassy yesterday to sign the book of condolence. And he came with Dr. Jill Biden, the First Lady, and he spent some time actually thinking about his message, writing it down. He then chatted for members of staff here as well for a few minutes afterwards, made them laugh a few times. So, yeah, I don't think there's any surprise. He was asked at an event yesterday by a reporter whether he'd be going, and his words were yes, probably. The problems are logistical, I suspect, if any. The funeral could be a clashing perhaps with the UN General Assembly, which is due in a couple of weeks' time in New York. That could change, of course, but it does seem like the President is expressing a wish elsewhere as well to go to the funeral. And I think the sort of heartfelt nature of his tributes that he paid yesterday are testament to that. So that will be a very big moment to see the President of the United States travelling to the UK, if it happens, for that state funeral.
OK, we're going to leave it there. Gary, thank you. Let's talk now to John Kerry, the US Special Presidential Envoy for Climate and a former Secretary of State, of course, of the United States. John Kerry, thanks very much indeed for joining us. We appreciate it. First of all, your thoughts following the death of the Queen. And now the world has a new King of the United Kingdom, Charles III.
Well, like everybody, we're all just amazingly touched because she reigned over such an extraordinary period of time, of history, and she was so much a part of it. And I think endeared herself to people all over the world, obviously. She conducted herself with such a sense of dignity, of purpose. She was, when she pushed on things, it was values-based, not political. And I think that in every way, people had great respect for her as a statesperson, as a woman who affected nations all around the world, and at some critical moments really pushed the political process to move on things, whether it was apartheid or other things over time. She knew how to walk that constitutional line and still have her point of view without abusing the process at all. She was also the calm in the storm, usually. I mean, she was no nonsense, no spin. I think people really appreciated that. And she had a connection with people of every walk of life. 14 presidents, some 15 prime ministers, and an amazing span of history.
Yeah, we're just looking actually, John, at some of the pictures of the Queen with some of the former presidents, JFK, Richard Nixon's just there now on screen. We had Harry Truman, Dwight D. Eisenhower, and of course you were Secretary of State under Barack Obama. And we showed a picture there of Prince Philip and the Queen with Michelle and Barack. What were your interactions with Her Majesty, and what are your fondest recollections of her as a person?
Well, I met her a few times, and particularly when she came to Washington a number of years ago. I forget the exact year, and I met her most recently in Windsor Castle at an evening reception when King Charles had convened a group of leaders from all around the world in the world of finance to try to move on the climate issue. And she was very funny. I mean, she came in and a small group of us met her and chatted with her. And she noted me, big smile, and she looked up and said, "I saw you on television." And I was quite struck by that. Yeah. To which the rejoinder should have been, "Well, I've seen you a few times too." But I wasn't that quick.
Yeah, we've been hearing so many anecdotes, John, about the humour, sense of humour of the Queen. We now have, of course, King Charles III. We know that environmental concerns, sustainable farming, climate change and so on are very close to his heart, and you are a special envoy for President Biden on climate change. Are you expecting, perhaps hoping, that the King will continue to be vocal on those issues, or will you appreciate now his elevated role in the world, and therefore perhaps he's going to have to be a little bit more careful with what he says?
Well, under any circumstances, I think the appropriate thing for me to say is not what I personally expect, but it's entirely appropriate for me, I think, to say I hope that he will be able to continue. I think he's been a very powerful voice, a very strong voice. The climate crisis is not a political issue per se. It's not labeled by any party. It's a matter of science, mathematics, and he's been seized by this issue for 50 years. He's been involved on the environment, on issues of conservation and sustainability and so forth. So I would hope, and I would assume that he hopes, that he can continue. I think he has the ability, obviously, as king, to be able to be morally persuasive around the world and to cajole action and to convene. And after all, his mother certainly at times spoke out on things that were important. And beyond that, the prior kings also helped their nation through a war, and the whole issue of whether or not people should negotiate for peace or with Hitler before there was a war, and then be willing to go to war. I think the king played a very significant role in bolstering Winston Churchill and those who made those choices. So he and the palace will obviously have to decide how all of that plays out. But I do know that he spoke eloquently at the World Economic Forum last year. And I think he's had real impact, particularly on this effort to bring the private sector to the table, because no country has enough money to effect this transition appropriately. It's going to take an enormous effort. He understands that as well as anybody in the world, and I certainly hope we don't lose that voice.
Sure. And have you spoken to him about any of these issues in particular yourself?
Which issues?
Environmental issues, climate change and so on?
Oh, absolutely. We've met many times over the last few years in various meetings. In fact, we were scheduled to have a meeting in Scotland today, an all-day meeting with business people who are coming from around the world and with non-governmental organizations. And he was still then His Royal Highness, but he wanted that meeting to go on yesterday until, of course, we lost the Queen. At that point, the meeting was cancelled, and so I came down from Scotland, and I'm here in London now, moving on the rest of my itinerary. But he really wants to this is life or death. I mean, everybody has talked about this in the world as being an existential issue. It doesn't have a Tory or Labour or any other party in the world's label on it. It's a universal issue about the planet. And he has, for 50 years, been ahead of the curve, speaking out and working on approaches to deal with the challenge, whether it's nature-based solutions or deforestation or sustainable farming, so many different components of it. And I think clearly, I know he would want to try to be able to continue to comment as, the king of this incredibly important player in the mosaic of dealing with the climate crisis.
Indeed. Okay. John Kerry, it's good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Thank
Glad
you.
to be
John
with
Kerry
you.
there,
Thank
US
you.
Special Envoy on climate change for President Biden, whom we understand. The suggestion is from American media that he will be attending the state funeral of the Queen. We don't have a date for that as yet, but the suggestion is that the American president will be there, which takes me neatly into a chat with our World Affairs editor, John Simpson, who's with us. We saw the roll call of American presidents, 14 in all, that the Queen has dealt with. And the protocol that can be a little bit starch for some around the world. American presidents, you understand, have had trouble having to deal with from time to time.
Well, I've just spoken to, I'm just trying to think, I think it's 3 of them about meeting the Queen. And the amusing thing is, these people, all of them men so far at any rate, all always called the most powerful man in the world. How nervous they were, particularly when coming to Buckingham Palace, but also when the Queen came to them. I suppose it was the jewellery and the fur and the glamour and everything.
Yeah.
And how always, in every case, she had a real talent for putting people at their ease. Not only Americans. I mean, I've talked to a number of African heads of state. She had a particular interest and affection for Africa as a continent. And of course, she made close friends with several African presidents. Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia, for instance, a long-standing friend of hers. Julius Nyerere, I mean, quite a kind of relatively peaceful revolutionary. Nevertheless, he had a really good relationship with her. And of course, Nelson Mandela. And, of course, it's the kind of way that people are in Africa, to be quite tactile and so on. So before meeting the Queen, each of these people, each of the African leaders, but also each American leader was told, you don't touch the Queen. And so often, forgetting the sort of starchiness for an instant. I mean, I remember Kenneth Kaunda putting his arm round her and then thinking, I'm not supposed to do this. And how well she always dealt with that. There was never any kind of frostiness. If there was a sort of starch in the relationship, it came solely from the courtiers, never from her. And of course, the newspapers made endless fuss about it when an American president put his hand around her or something like that. You don't do that. There was an Australian Prime Minister in particular who did the same thing, and he got roasted in the British press. But it never came from the Queen herself.
Yeah, I mean, she was completely aware of the trepidation, perhaps, on the part of world leaders about being in her presence simply because of the protocol and so on. She was, as you rightly say, able to sort of relax people to the point where they could interact with her on a more personal level. We are, of course, in a period of mourning now. She has passed away. And you remember, as a little boy, I stress, a little boy, remember that period of mourning when her father passed
George
away?
George VI. I do. Yeah. I remember it terribly well. I suppose because it was such a big thing at the time. I was 8 years old. I used to travel by bus to school. The schools carried on. But I remember the bus conductors wearing black armbands. I remember how quiet everything was. And on the buses, in the streets, people talking in hushed voices. I mean, it was, of course, an entirely different world, an utterly different world, as different from today's world as it could be imagined. And yet, you know, I've been walking the streets of London here today. People are quite quiet. And more than once, I think about 3 times, I heard people say, just using the word the Queen, the Queen. And, you know, we're not going to have any football matches on Saturday. It hasn't changed to the extent that we don't care. It's just that we're kind of less formal than we used to be.
Yes, indeed. The Bank of England has delayed its meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee. They were expected to put up interest rates. That is not going to happen.
Very George VI.
Week. Yes, indeed. I wonder as well, John, about your reflections and recollections of the Queen herself, because you met her on a number of occasions.
I did, yes. Well, I had it was a real pleasure, actually, to follow her around a lot of her big trips, particularly the ones associated with the Commonwealth Conference every other year. And, you know, it was always a pleasure, because even though the British Prime Minister of the day, Margaret Thatcher, on several occasions had issues which you knew were going to stir people up and there were going to be rows and everything, it was never like that while the Queen was around. And she very delicately would speak about some of the subjects, made it fairly clear on 1 or 2 occasions how she thought the best way to approach these things were, and then she'd move on, which I think is, you know, the distinction between the Crown and the political side of things was really important. She was a very, in private, a very crisp and shrewd person. You know, it's famous, the comedians and everybody always say, you know, oh, have you come far? Which was one of the sort of standard questions. Yes. When you've no idea who these people are in front of you, you know, you've got to say something. But actually, I mean, in private, she was very, very clear and crisp. I remember being given a bit of a grilling, actually, about what it was like to be in Iraq, in Baghdad, during the war, what Saddam Hussein was like, what sort of person he was. She was really interested in these things. It wasn't just a sort of a passing, oh, you've been to Iraq, oh, how interesting, you know, and then thinking of something else. I mean, she was really, that was an important question as far as she was concerned. She'd had that ability to make you feel as though what you said mattered, even though probably in my case it didn't.
It is a unique skill, no question about that, and one everyone hopes King Charles III also has. John, a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for being with us. Our Foreign Affairs Editor, John Simpson there. Politicians have been paying their respects at a special parliamentary session convened to mark the death of Queen Elizabeth. The Lords has been meeting as well. Both chambers have been in session today. And the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, was the first on her feet to speak.
She knew this generation of Britons would be as strong as any. And as we meet today, we remember the pledge she made on her 21st birthday to dedicate her life to service. the whole House will agree. Never has a promise been so completely fulfilled. Yeah. Her devotion to duty remains an example to us all. She carried out thousands of engagements. She took a red box every day. She gave her assent to countless pieces of legislation and was at the heart of our national life for 7 decades.
At this moment of uncertainty, where our country feels caught between a past it cannot relive and a future yet to be revealed, we must always remember one of the great lessons of our Queen's reign, that we are always better when we rise above the petty, the trivial, the day-to-day, to focus on the things that really matter, the things that unite us, rather than those which divide us. Yeah. Our Elizabethan age may now be over, but her legacy will live on forever.
She showed the world not just how to reign over a people, she showed the world how to give, how to love, and how to serve. And as we look back at that vast arc of service, its sheer duration is almost impossible to take in. She was the last living person in British public life to have served in uniform in the Second World War. She was the first female member of the royal family in 1,000 years to serve full-time in the armed forces, and that impulse to do her duty.
She was Queen, but she embodied us. Across the nations of the world and for so many people, meeting Queen Elizabeth simply made their day, and for many will be the memory of their life. Of course, for those of us who had the honour to serve as one of her prime ministers, those meetings were more frequent with the weekly audiences. These were not meetings with a high and mighty monarch, but a conversation with a woman of experience and knowledge and immense wisdom. They were also the one meeting I went to, which I knew would not be briefed out to the media.
We've been hearing so many stories about the sense of humour that the Queen had. Former Prime Ministers there, Theresa May and Boris Johnson, and of course before that Liz Truss, with their reflections on the death of the Queen. And we can go now to Downing Street, and our correspondent Zoe Conway is there for us, I think. Hi there, Zoe. It's believed, I think, that Liz Truss has actually left the building behind you and is either on her way or is at Buckingham Palace. We haven't got confirmation of that as yet, but clearly a get-to-know-you session for the new monarch and the new Prime Minister too.
Exactly. We believe that the meeting is happening very soon between the Prime Minister and King Charles. The first time that they will be meeting. They've spoken on the phone, which of course was an opportunity for the Prime Minister to offer her condolences to the King. But this is the first meeting where it is just the two of them at the palace, a meeting known as an audience. And what's remarkable about this meeting is that the two of them can be completely frank with each other, safe in the knowledge that it won't be leaked. That's certainly what Prime Ministers have said over the decades. That's why they value this meeting so much, that they know that they can speak freely with the sovereign, that Liz Truss will know that she can speak freely with the King, safe in the knowledge that it is just the two of them. We don't know what they're going to talk about, but one can assume that at the forefront of the Prime Minister's mind will be the knowledge that she's meeting a man who has just lost his mother and whose sons have just lost a grandmother who they loved.
Indeed. Zoe, thank you. Zoe Conway there in Downing Street. And as Zoe was saying there, we believe that the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, is on her way to Buckingham Palace. She may actually already be there for that meeting with King Charles III. And of course, it is weekly meetings that the Prime Ministers and the serving monarch have. So the first of many, one suspects, between those two people. Let's talk now to Dr. Nigel Fletcher, who's a political historian at the Centre for British Politics and Government. It's good to see you. Thanks for being with us. How important is that weekly meeting, actually, between the serving monarch and the sitting Prime Minister?
Well, it's extremely important. I mean, we heard in the VT there Theresa May saying that it's the only meeting that doesn't leak, and it got a laugh, but actually that's not an insignificant thing. Tony Blair also said that as Prime Minister, there's two people you can really talk to. One's the wife and the other's the Queen, was the joke he made. And it is really important. All of the Queen's Prime Ministers have said that they found it a really important part of their week when they could talk to somebody who not only was not going to leak it, but also had a huge insight into politics and into statecraft over, by the end, 70 years. And that's really valuable for a Prime Minister.
Indeed, we were hearing a little bit earlier from Sir Simon Sharma, the historian, about the idea that the kind of knowledge, background and time that the Queen has spent with so many leaders, she can bring to bear on the discussion she's having or was having with the current leader, and perhaps gently guide a Prime Minister in a certain direction based on our own history and based on our own knowledge.
Yes, and it's often said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And there will be a lot of things that come up in politics where the Queen, and we again have heard this from Prime Ministers who say she was able to say to them, well, that has happened, do think back, this is not unprecedented, and can give the insight that she had to that. Now, we do have a new king and a new Prime Minister, so they're both new in their roles. But I think that King Charles now has the experience of many years as Prince of Wales. He is the most experienced new monarch that we've had, really, if we talk about the number of years he's spent waiting to be king. So he brings a lot of experience too. And I think that will be of value to Liz Truss. She will find that a huge source of support and wisdom.
Given the constitutional constraints on the monarchy, one wonders how far Prince Charles, if he's minded, given when he was prince he was quite activist, and now he is King Charles III, one wonders how far he can go in perhaps pushing a Prime Minister in a certain direction, whether it's on the economy or sustainable farming or climate change and so on. Where are the parameters?
Well, I think that he is aware that the role is very different. He's said as much in interviews in the past. It's a huge difference that we have interviews with him, of course. The Queen never gave interviews, and we knew very little about her views during her reign. The new king is different. We do know about some of his personal views, but I think he's minded that this is a constitutional role.
OK. Nigel, thank you for that. Stay with us for a couple of seconds because we've got pictures just coming into us and they are showing, I think, there, the Prime Minister arriving at Buckingham Palace for an audience with the new king. We think that meeting is still going on as I speak, but those pictures coming into us just in the last couple of seconds or so. Back to Dr. Nigel Fletcher. Yes, you were saying that Prince Charles, he had a lot of views that he made public. Now, King Charles, where is the barrier when it comes to talking to the Prime Minister and getting his views across?
Well, I think he'll be mindful, as the Queen was, of the accepted constitutional norms, which are that the role of the monarch is to be consulted, to encourage and to warn. And I think in private he can do that. He'll be well aware that he can't overstep the mark by making public comments. But certainly I think he will take full use of the opportunity he has to give his views. And that's part of the reason that meetings like the one we're seeing are going to be so important. It is a historic moment we're seeing. The first meeting of the new Prime Minister with the new sovereign, and those are meetings that will take place every week pretty much now from now on. And I think that in all of those meetings there are a huge historical curiosity, because we don't know. It's a bit like Schrodinger's meeting. We don't know what goes on in them. We can imagine there's been dramas written about them and so on. They've been dramatised in The Crown and things like that. But we never know exactly what goes on in those meetings. But I think they will both find it of huge value I think that the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, will find it of huge value to have a sovereign who's got such many years of experience.
Indeed. Dr. Nigel Fletcher, political historian at the Centre for British Policies and Government. Thank you. Thanks very much indeed. Now, we're going to go over to Buckingham Palace, get more of a sense of the atmosphere there, and my colleague Joanna Gosling is standing by. Hi, Joanna.
Hi, Clive. And also, there is a very important meeting happening in Buckingham Palace behind us right now. We saw those pictures of Liz Truss arriving at the palace, and about 15 minutes or so ago we saw a motorcade pass by. We weren't completely sure who was in it. We assumed it was Liz Truss, but we've now seen those pictures of her going in. So exactly what you were just talking about there, that audience between King Charles III and the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, is happening. And you talk about the atmosphere. It is quite extraordinary to see the crowds who are gathered here, and that moment that we saw earlier when King Charles III arrived along with his Queen Consort Camilla. They got out of the car before going into the palace to greet members of the crowd, and it was a moment of direct connection between the new king and the people, and he took his time to walk along the wide sweep of people from one side of the palace to the other, greeting people. Some kissed his hand, one kissed his cheek, and we heard shouts of "God save the King." Let's talk more about the audience right now between the King and the Prime Minister with Catherine Haddon from the Institute for Government. She joins me. Welcome. Well, I mean, it's hard to know if it's completely unprecedented, but certainly extremely rare for a moment like this, where it is the first audience between a monarch and a new Prime Minister, and it is the first audience for that monarch as well.
Yeah, I mean, people have been scouring the history books but can't think of an equivalent example. And it is an extraordinary moment, and in a sense, it gives them a sort of focus for it, because you know, they've got a lot to talk about. Liz Truss was in the middle of forming her government. That involves the Queen. It's not just that moment when she kissed hands on Tuesday. And meanwhile, obviously, for King Charles, he is now starting his reign, and that involves the government. So there is certainly a lot for them to talk about. So it won't be just small talk or any such thing going on in there, I think.
And you mentioned the formation of the government. Has what has happened now had an impact on the formation of that government?
Yes, the first we heard about the Queen's worsening health was, I think, Wednesday evening, when there was news that a Privy Council due to take place would be postponed. And that was an important moment, because that was when the cabinets would be sworn into their roles. They would be made Privy Councillors, those who weren't cabinet ministers before, and they would be given the seals of office. And that's not just a sort of ceremonial thing, that's actually fundamental for the powers that they hold as ministers. So there has undoubtedly had to have been a bit of workarounds going on in government for the last few days to sort of work that out. So I think a Privy Council will be held probably today or early tomorrow before the Accession Council, so that those cabinet ministers can get sworn into the Privy Council before then it meets for the Accession Council.
So this is a new government with so much to do and so much importance, obviously, to get it right, to get the tone right. We heard from Liz Truss, but it's not just about the visible things that we see. There is going to be so much planning behind the scenes, albeit that the planning has been in place for a long time. Actually delivering it now, it's the job, the duty of new members of government.
Indeed, and I mean, there are a number of these ministers who've been in governments for the last few years, so they would have known something of the plans in place. They're not all coming to it completely fresh, but still, you know, people have been planning for this since the 1960s, but you never knew the circumstances. The last 2 years, undoubtedly, there's been a lot of thinking behind the scenes of what do we do in COVID circumstances. See, I don't think anyone thought about what happens if it's just after the formation of a new government. So, yes, a lot of things then have to be worked out in practice. I think the main thing, though, is that always with all those plans, they were wanting to emphasise that there is continuity. You go seamlessly from one Queen to the King. The accession is automatic. There's a lot more involved, but it's automatic. Meanwhile, though, government continues.
It's not as if government stops for this whole period, even though we're in a period of national mourning. That's even harder to do given all of this happened when Liz Truss was standing up making that all-important speech about the energy package that she'll be bringing in. So I'm sure the government will want to try and reassure that things are still going on, even though this is taking the sort of national attention away.
Catherine Haddon from the Institute for Government, thank you very much. And that continuity very much on display here in that we have so many flowers for the Queen outside the gates of Buckingham Palace. They're not going to stay there for long because there is an area that has been designated in Green Park, which is just behind us here, which is where the floral tributes will go. But it is obviously very much a moment of remembrance, of coming to terms with the passing of the Queen, and also looking to the future and King Charles III. And he's going to be speaking to the nation at 6 o'clock. That is a broadcast that will come from here at Buckingham Palace. And he is currently, as we've been saying, meeting the new Prime Minister. Back to you, Ben.
Joanna, thank you very much indeed. Joanna Gosling there at Buckingham Palace. Well, Britain is now in a period of national mourning and royal mourning. Let's just bring you up to date with where we are so far. And let's just tell you that the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister, is currently holding an audience with King Charles III, who arrived at the palace a little bit earlier on this afternoon. And the first televised address will be made by the new King, King Charles III, at 6 o'clock this evening, 1800 UK time. Now, after the speech, a public service of remembrance will be held at St Paul's Cathedral. Some 2,000 people will be there. The Prime Minister and the Mayor of London expected to attend that service of remembrance at St Paul's Cathedral. Well, as we were reflecting, King Charles III, as we now refer to him, has arrived at Buckingham Palace. He flew down from Balmoral with the Queen Consort and was driven from RAF Northolt. And as he arrived there at Buckingham Palace, he stepped out of his vehicle and met all the well-wishers who had come there to pay their respects to the Queen and to leave tributes, but also to welcome him as King, King Charles III. And I was there actually at Buckingham Palace this afternoon as he arrived there in bright sunshine. There had been some rain earlier on, but the sun shone for the King as he arrived at Buckingham Palace. You could see some of the crowd kissing his hand. One lady even kissed him on the cheek, actually. And there were chants of long live the King. And I think the crowd who had come from all over the country, and many people from abroad, many tourists were here as well, wanted to wish him well and to wish him luck for the years ahead as King, but also to pass on their condolences. Of course, he is a son mourning his mother. And as he mourns, there are also a lot of official and royal duties to be undertaken by King Charles, not least an audience with Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, and this is her arriving at Buckingham Palace. And what a week, really, in many ways, because, of course, Liz Truss was appointed Prime Minister by the late Queen Elizabeth at Balmoral earlier on this week. And now she is having an audience at Buckingham Palace with the new King. And our correspondent Zoe Conway is in Downing Street. A historic week, of course, as we've been reflecting. And a first audience with the King for the new Prime Minister.
It's remarkable, isn't it? The Prime Minister entered number 10 3 days ago. King Charles III walked into Buckingham Palace as King for the first time this afternoon. So we have a King and a Prime Minister new in their jobs, and they're both facing a daunting task right now. King Charles III is facing a nation in mourning for his mother. The Prime Minister is facing a nation that right now is feeling anxious about the economy, the cost of living. They both have a daunting task ahead of them, and you do wonder whether they will both be reflecting on that. Of course, it's tempting to stress the inexperience, but of course, let's remember that this Prime Minister has been in the cabinet for the last 8 years. And of course, the King has been preparing for his role all his life. So there will be a great deal of experience there in terms of government, in terms of how the matters of state are handled between these two people. They'll be meeting just the two of them in the palace. And what is so remarkable about this meeting, this audience that will be happening every week, is the fact that they can speak freely. It's just the two of them, safe in the knowledge that their conversations won't leak. That's certainly what Prime Ministers over the years have said about one of the things they most value about that meeting.
And of course, if we reflect on the life of the Queen, during her life there were 15 Prime Ministers, starting with Winston Churchill, that she appointed, and many Prime Ministers, many audiences, but for King Charles, the first audience with the Prime Minister.
Exactly, and they will all have seen a side of the Queen that the rest of us probably never saw. I've been looking through what some of the past Prime Ministers have said about their meetings with the Queen, and one anecdote was striking, which was Prime Minister Harold Wilson talking about how he anxiously prepared for his meetings with the Queen because he knew that she would come prepared, and he didn't want to be caught out by her. And we've heard in the House of Commons today these incredibly moving tributes from politicians who met the Queen in their roles as Privy Councillors and as ex-Prime Ministers. There was a particularly amusing anecdote, in fact, from the former Prime Minister Theresa May, who talked about being at Balmoral with the Queen, and these could be very informal moments at Balmoral. There would be this legendary picnic outside that the Queen would have with the Prime Minister, and Theresa May talked about how they were all mucking in and getting ready for this picnic and this barbecue, and Theresa May dropped a block of cheese on the ground and said she didn't know what to do, and she picked it up and put it on the table, and then realised that the Queen had been watching her doing this, and they both smiled. And that anecdote was greeted with much mirth, much humour in the House of Commons. So the Prime Minister will see a side of the King today that perhaps most of us will never see. There's so much that will remain private in those meetings.
Indeed. All right, Zoe, thank you very much indeed. Let's go back to Buckingham Palace now, because Joanna Gosling is there for us. And the crowd's still there, Joanna. Well, they've been there, hundreds of them. I was watching earlier on today, pouring out of the nearby tube stations to be there for a real moment of history.
Yeah, and when I came here actually on the tube, there were people in the carriage where I was holding flowers, which I assume they were bringing here, and there were people with children who were talking about wanting to come here just to show their respects, and there is a very big crowd here. It's sort of seemed to thin a little bit a while ago, but now it's absolutely, as far as you can see and as deep as you can see, there are people, and there will be people who just want to come because, of course, it is such an historic moment. There will be people who want to come to bring flowers, who want to leave a message, who want to show their respects, who want to remember the Queen. And as we look at that scene there with the royal standard at full mast over Buckingham Palace, that is the sign that that is where the new king is. He arrived here earlier, and just prior to his arrival the Union flag was flying at half-mast, but that was then lowered and replaced by the flag there that signifies the monarch is in residence. Of course, this won't be his residence for now, but presumably over time he will be moving his office here. He will be moving from Clarence House, which is not far away, but that's where he moved from St James's Palace on the death of the Queen Mother. And now this is a palace where he is inside with the very important matter of preparing to address the nation at 6 o'clock tonight. And he had a very direct interaction with the people earlier when he arrived, and took some time to greet the members of the crowd who wanted to shake his hand, who wanted to say, "God save the King." One kissed his cheek. It was a moment of, it felt real significance, but because of course this is going to be a time in the coming days when there is so much ceremony that has to happen, and yet here today there was that direct connection. And as I mentioned, in Buckingham Palace there is the King, and he is with the Prime Minister Liz Truss, and with me is Catherine Haddon from the Institute for Government, and they're going to be having a first audience, the first for each of them in these roles. What will the parameters of that conversation be?
It's difficult to know. I mean, we've been hearing from former Prime Ministers talking a lot more about their interactions with Queen Elizabeth in those speeches in Parliament, but by and large, that audience with the Queen, Theresa May herself said it today, it was the one meeting she'd go to that she knew wouldn't be leaked, because it is held in such reverence that you don't leak that kind of information about what goes on. But you know, we know that it was really important to the Queen. It was, she kept very well abreast of government business. So those conversations were about the business of government, about the state of the nation, all these kinds of things. It's not just for show. One assumes that King Charles has learnt those lessons from his mother, understands the importance of it. Whether he does it in a different style, whether they have different conversations, we just don't know. You know, it's difficult to compare. And as you say, neither had done it before. I mean, obviously Liz Truss met the Queen when she was asked to form a government, but neither had that weekly audience. So in a sense, they will make of it what they will.
And Liz Truss is, we can hear whistles. That signifies, I don't know if you can pick up just behind us, but the outriders heading out, followed by the police vehicles with sirens flashing. I'm guessing, but we don't know at this point, that that's Liz Truss leaving. So she was in there for what, about perhaps half an hour or so?
Yeah. Yeah, and which is about the normal time for it. I think, you know, it as I say, it is a weekly audience, so it becomes a very regular routine for Prime Ministers, but you wouldn't normally have these kind of crowds when you're coming up the Mall to head to the Palace. So in a sense, you know, a huge moment for Liz Truss as well, that first meeting. But
and so she goes back to Downing Street with the normal business of government to take care of. She was delivering that, or she had delivered her announcement on energy, and the debate on that was underway when the news came through of the Queen. How does the job in hand right now, which is organising a state funeral and everything else that needs to happen in the next couple of weeks, how does that go alongside the other business of government?
I mean, it's a very good point. It's a hugely busy diary. What's really interesting, she would have still been in the process of receiving phone calls from world leaders congratulating her on Prime Minister, and of course those would have immediately then segued into phone calls of condolence. So I suspect she's having to mix a bit of both. Most of her focus will probably be on big issues of government. There would be some urgent things that they would want to get organised, but there will still need to be a lot of focus on the plans for the funeral. There are civil servants who are, whose whole job is to focus on these issues. The Foreign Office will be very much focused on this being the biggest international, diplomatic moment for a good long while. Huge numbers of dignitaries coming to this country. The Home Office will be very focused on the security implications of all of that. There's all sorts of issues for various government departments. For the Prime Minister, I think the particular issue will be obviously her role, monitoring all of this, but also particularly thinking about that important state funeral and just how important that is for the British government to support the monarchy at this moment.
An enormous test, isn't it?
It is a test, but again, a lot of these plans have been very worked out, particularly around, the nature of the funeral. The Queen herself would have had a big say in how she wanted that to go. There's a lot of formality. It's a state funeral, so there will be a lot of pageantry, a lot of ceremony around it. From the government's point of view, like I say, it's all the logistical parts of it. And yes, they would have had so many plans in place of who is doing what and how it's organised, but you never know until reality hits all the sort of finer difficulties that you've got to work out, whether it's, difficulties of working out the exact date of it, clashes with other world events happening, or whether it's logistics of what we're seeing today. It's just started raining, but these crowds, nobody knew in government for sure how the British people would react. So they could work out plans for where people would come, for the policing and so forth, but it was always going to have to be a test of how does the British people respond to it, how do they want to mourn effectively, and how can the plans adapt to fit in with what they want to do.
Thank you very much, Catherine Haddon from the Institute for Government. And the heavens, don't know if you can pick up the noise actually of that rain on the tent over my head, but the heavens have opened again. There were the crowds here last night in the rain. They were here earlier in the sunshine when King Charles greeted them. And as you can see behind me, they're here in the rain again, and there are many, many umbrellas. So people will keep coming. Back to you for now in the studio.
Yeah, Joanna, in fact, King Charles, when he was there at Buckingham Palace meeting all those people, all those well-wishers, was lucky with the weather because it was suddenly bright sunshine, having been raining earlier on, but the sun certainly shone for him and the Queen Consort. Well, let's just tell you what is happening in terms of the Prime Minister. Liz Truss, who we just saw, was there at Buckingham Palace for that audience. That, we gather, is now over. So that first audience has finished. King Charles has other duties. He will be making his first televised address to the nation a little bit earlier on. So that follows his audience with the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss. And that televised address is at 6 p.m. London time, and after the speech there will be a public service of remembrance at St Paul's Cathedral. Some 2,000 people will be there, and the Prime Minister and the Mayor of London expected to attend that as well. Well, Britain is now in a period of national mourning and royal mourning, and with the story of the day so far, here's our correspondent Daniel Sandford.
Less than 24 hours after his mother's death, King Charles III had to leave Balmoral Castle to fly to London, where his Rolls-Royce brought him to the gates of Buckingham Palace. There he greeted people who'd come to mourn his mother, the Queen, and now found themselves welcoming the new king. At this moment of transition, the crowd expressing a complex set of emotions, sadness and shock, but also love for the new monarch. His wife, Queen Camilla, had travelled with him to the capital, where this afternoon he'll meet the Prime Minister, and this evening he will address the nation. The address will be filmed in the Blue Drawing Room. At noon, bells rang out in abbeys and cathedrals across the country to mark the passing of the UK's longest-serving monarch. Moments later, MPs assembled in Parliament.
Order, order. I invite the House to rise and observe a minute's silence in memory of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
The cut and thrust of political debate silenced. This, a time only for tributes.
Today, our country, our people, this House are united in mourning. Queen Elizabeth II was this great country's greatest monarch. And for the vast majority of us, it feels impossible to imagine a Britain without her. All our thoughts are with her beloved family, our royal family, at this moment of profound grief.
Today, there are countless people in this country and around the world who have experienced the same sudden access of unexpected emotion. And I think millions of us are trying to understand why we are feeling this deep and personal and almost familial sense of loss. Perhaps it's partly that she's always been there, a changeless human reference point in British life.
The death gun salute was longer than any that has come before. 96 rounds fired, one for each year of her life. In Hyde Park, Edinburgh, Windsor, Gibraltar, Cardiff, Northern Ireland, Stonehenge, Plymouth, Jersey, and at the Tower of London. As people gathered at Buckingham Palace, the Queen's London home, the Premier League announced it was postponing the weekend's fixtures. The last night of the proms has already been cancelled. We are entering a period of royal mourning and national mourning. Among those who were at the palace, 2 Chelsea pensioners who had met the Queen.
Ordinary people she would put at ease, and she just had that wonderful ability to be personable to people.
Precious. Very much as a queen, as a mother, a grandmother and a great-grandmother.
Her death dominates today's front pages of newspapers from around the world in a way that only a few events do in each generation. The country is now preparing for the formal process of marking the passing of the monarch, the lying in state, the funeral, the end of the era of Queen Elizabeth II. Daniel Sandford, BBC News.
And let's talk now about this as a moment of history with Sir David Cannadine, who is a professor of history at Princeton University in New Jersey, and the end of an era, as we were just hearing there from our correspondent. And also, we've just had a meeting of an audience of the new Prime Minister with the new King.
Well, it is, of course, a deeply sad time, but in its own way also a unique time, partly because of the sheer length and longevity of the Queen's life and her reign, but also this extraordinary circumstance that within little more than 48 hours, the head of state changed from Queen Elizabeth to King Charles III, and the Prime Minister changed from Boris Johnson to Liz Truss. And that, I think, is an unprecedented combination of events, the like of which has never happened before.
And the new King comes to the throne at the age of 73. The late Queen came to the throne at the age of 25. He has served a very long apprenticeship. Talk to us a bit about the differences, perhaps, between them in terms of experience.
Well, one of the oddities of the monarchy in modern times is that many of the most successful monarchs, Queen Victoria, George V, George VI, and Queen Elizabeth II, were not born expecting to inherit the throne. And some of those who were born expecting to inherit the throne were not wholly happy. One thinks of George IV or, of course, Edward VIII. So it will be interesting to see how things play out with King Charles III, who was the longest living heir to the throne there's ever been. So this ought to give him a certain amount of experience to carry out the job of being sovereign. even as, of course, it also means that he will have a far shorter reign as monarch than his mother did.
And he's had his moments of controversy while he was heir to the throne, but he has said in the past, in an interview actually, he said, "I'm not stupid. When I am king, I will behave differently from how I have." But he has occasionally attracted controversy, and some people have wondered whether he would be in any way a kind of activist king. Do you think he will?
Well, we have to wait and see, and that's a statement that can be made about many aspects of the monarchy as he now embodies it. But he is certainly on record as saying that once he becomes king, he will not be giving the sort of opinions that he on occasions did as Prince of Wales. And we will just have to see how matters evolve and develop as his reign unfolds.
And the Queen's reign was so long, and in a way, Britain changed so much in that span of time, didn't it? From a post-war imperial power to, I suppose, a modern European democracy. What are your thoughts about the era that has just ended?
Well, one of the remarkable aspects of monarchy, not often, but certainly in the case of the Queen, is that it provides the regnal dates, provide a kind of structured retrospection that you otherwise wouldn't have. So there is this sense of now looking back across those 70 years and trying to get a sense of what the major themes of those 70 years were. And I suppose one of them is the downsizing, the de-imperialization of Britain. She inherited a great power throne in the early 1950s. It's not, I think, plausible to claim that Britain is one of the great global powers now, though it may have more soft power than sometimes is recognized. But that was a very significant shift. The British Empire disappeared. So de-imperialization and downsizing was one of the major themes across those 70 years. And I think another was de-Victorianization, the firm moral code of the Victorian era, which again was still prevalent when she became monarch, but the changes with regard to abortion, with regard to divorce, with regard to homosexuality have resulted in a very different moral climate now. And tying those two things together, of course, the sense that the empire may have gone, but the empire has in other ways come home. Britain has become a multi-faith, multi-ethnic society in a way that simply wasn't true when she became queen.
And the empire has gone, but the Commonwealth remains. She loved the Commonwealth. King Charles, we know, loves the Commonwealth. He is head of the Commonwealth. He's head of state to what I think 14 Commonwealth nations. How important do you think it will be to him?
Well, it's certainly true that while we didn't know much about what the Queen thought about anything, which was part of her achievement, she clearly did care very much about the union of the United Kingdom, and she clearly cared very much about the Commonwealth, not least because if you're a monarch, then, as it were, the larger your realm, the greater the prestige you have, and the Commonwealth gave the Queen a global platform and resonance, even as she gave it in exchange a lifetime of service. And it is, I think, reasonable to suppose that King Charles III will wish to take the same view both of the Union and of the Commonwealth.
Sir David Cannadine, thank you so much for your thoughts and your analysis, Professor of History at Princeton University in New Jersey. Well, as we were saying, the new Prime Minister has had an audience at Buckingham Palace with the new King, King Charles III. There is a service of remembrance this evening, and also to tell you that we will have a televised address to the nation at 6 o'clock UK time from King Charles III. Now, you will have seen those pictures at Buckingham Palace when King Charles arrived there, and he met the crowds, and he spent a long time meeting dozens and dozens of well-wishers. I was there to watch it earlier on this afternoon. One woman leaned over to kiss King Charles's hand as the sovereign was greeting those well-wishers, and she's been talking to our special correspondent Lucy Manning.
So Jenny, you were pictured kissing the new king. Just tell me about...
I'm very proud of it. I'm very happy. I'm very, very happy. I'm very proud to have kissed and I hope to.
How did it happen that you met him?
You mean how? I don't know, just came to me. I was so happy, just came. I was asking. I don't just grab and kissing him. Just say, may I kiss you? He say, well, yeah. I did. If he say like this, no. I'm certainly happy to see him in the front room.
And what did it mean to you and all the others to see the king here today?
Very happy, everybody was happy and calling, save the king or something, and we're very happy.
But obviously sad about the death.
He's mad. Yeah, I say, yes, sorry you lost. I love the queen. But what can we do? I lost my husband.
Okay. Thank you so much.
And we lost Prince Philip as well. And he's come from Greece. It was very nice. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
One of the well-wishers who met King Charles there at Buckingham Palace, and lots of the people who were there were shouting out, God save the King, and we love you, King Charles, and we loved your mum. Extraordinary scenes there. Well, earlier on, King Charles had left Balmoral, and Kirsty Wark is at the Queen's estate in Balmoral in Scotland. And let's go to her now. Kirsty.
Hello from a sunny early evening here in Balmoral, outside the gates among the trees on Royal Deeside. And I think the scenes here are very much in contrast to those exuberant scenes you were talking about at Buckingham Palace. Because for all the day, from the early morning till now, there have been people streaming across the bridge very quietly, coming in to pay their respects, all manner of bouquets and wreaths, people, local people, and actually people from very far afield, people who happen to be in Scotland, all want to come to be here. And I think, in a way, it was very fitting that the Queen spent her final days here, because she has a tremendous connection with this area that stretches back to Queen Victoria in the mid-1800s, and it was a strong line that ran through from that to this day. And I think people recognise this. They feel very fond of her. They wanted to come, I think, to be near her. People were very quiet. They would stream in, spend a little time there, leave their messages, and then go again. And it's still going on in this beautiful evening sunlight. This was a place that mattered so much to the royal family, still matters to the royal family, matters so much to the Queen. And of course, she's had many sad times here, but many happy times too. It was here where she learned of the death of Princess Diana in 1997, when she was here with Princes William and Harry. And it was here that she came to grieve and have peace after the death of Prince Philip. But she's also had very many happy memories here. We've seen many images and photographs of her in a very casual way out enjoying community here. And in fact, among the messages that were left was a wonderful message which says, "You carried out your vow of duty and service to the end." And we must remember that, of course, that happened both with Boris Johnson and with Liz Truss. But the feeling was that she was always there for the people, even in her most private moments, that her sense of duty was what actually carried her forward in the minds of the people here, who very gently just want to come, remember her, and move on. And so what we expect to happen this afternoon, Zara Tindall and Beatrice and Eugenie, Princess Beatrice and Eugenie arrived. We do not know if there's any further members of the royal family arriving tomorrow. It's been a very private day for people inside here, both royal family and members of the royal household and the staff. And we do not yet know if members of the royal family will come out and see these beautiful thousands of bouquets here tomorrow. We also expect, but we do not finally know, that the late Queen will be moved to St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh, perhaps over the weekend, certainly be there for Monday. So really, this evening, there's no sign of let-up. It's only 4:30, but I expect that there'll be people coming here to pay their respects well into the evening.
All right, Kirsty. Well, I'm glad the weather's improved, because it's been pretty rainy there over the last few days. I know. Kirsty walked there for us at Balmoral. Well, across the world, leaders have been paying their heartfelt tributes to the Queen. The French President, Emmanuel Macron, said, "We all feel an emptiness after her death." The President of the United States, Joe Biden, said the Queen had, in his words, defined an era. Our diplomatic correspondent, Caroline Hawley, has this report.
Please join in a moment of silence in the memory of Queen Elizabeth.
Across continents, people paused their lives to mark the moment and pay their respects. This was the opening match of the season for America's National Football League in Los Angeles. On the other side of the country, sport stopped too for Queen Elizabeth at the semi-finals of the US Open in New York. She was the most travelled monarch in history. Among her myriad meetings with international politicians here and abroad were as many as 12 US presidents.
I had the opportunity to meet her before she passed, and she was an incredibly gracious and decent woman. And the thoughts and prayers of the American people are with the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth in their grief.
She was a curious, highly intelligent person who really wanted to learn what you knew and how it would fit into the world.
She played an extraordinary role navigating the world stage for decades. Never a foot put wrong, as she met a wide range of people, from politicians to popes. Pope Francis paid tribute to her life of unstinting service to the good of the nation and the Commonwealth, her example of devotion to duty. She remained head of state of 15 countries, including Jamaica, which she visited 6 times during her reign. But even here, where Republican sentiment is now strong, she has plenty of admirers as a person.
She loved black people, so we're going to miss her because she loves our Jamaica too. So from time to time she come here and think I'm kind of respect for what she do for black people.
So many persons feel as if, you know, the passing might not affect them personally, but for me, just on a whole, knowing about history and like love watching those royal shows, it is really disheartening to learn about the passing of Queen Elizabeth.
And the outpouring of admiration came from countries far and near, politicians and ordinary people voicing their thoughts today.
The death is always sad. She was a monarch that made history, not only in the Commonwealth, but in the whole world.
President Macron of France today signed the condolence book and then directly addressed the people of Britain.
Elizabeth II mastered our language, loved our culture, and touched our hearts. She had not just an entente cordiale, but a warm, sincere, and loyal partnership. To you, she was your queen. To us, she was the queen.
Last night, this Paris landmark turned off its lights in a show of respect. And this was the famous Sydney Opera House, which the Queen opened in 1973, lit up to honour a remarkable royal diplomat and stateswoman. Caroline Hawley, BBC News.
A remarkable royal diplomat indeed. Let's talk to our World Affairs editor, John Simpson. We often talk about her appointing 15 British Prime Ministers, starting with Winston Churchill, but she met so many global statesmen and women, didn't she, through the decades? An extraordinary global iconic figure.
Yeah, I don't think there's been a world leader, there can't have been actually, a world leader who's met so many other leaders of different kinds, travelled so far. 70 years you can get a lot of travelling in, and she dedicated herself, especially in her middle years, to travelling, particularly to the places that she loved, the Caribbean, she loved, and Africa, all of Africa really. She absolutely loved and went back and back and back. And African leaders, I used to think, when I'd see them at Commonwealth conferences and so on, they were the most strongly in favour of seeing the Queen and enjoyed it the most.
And American presidents, for example, you know, famously the most powerful people in the world when they are in the White House. The highlight of their career, many of them have said, was to meet the Queen and spend time with the Queen.
Yeah, what was funny, I've talked to 3 different American ex-presidents about meeting the Queen, is how nervous they were beforehand, how awkward they felt. That was what the words of one ex-president, and how they were lectured too before they went in there about what they should do and say and how they should do it. And always they found that the Queen was the kind of most relaxed, least starchy person around, so that when they did the unthinkable that they were supposed never to do, put their arm around her or touched her in some way, she never seemed to mind in the slightest bit. She just took it as a matter of course.
And you met the Queen many times, I think, John. You were honoured by the Queen, and I think you could tell us a couple of anecdotes that perhaps we can now reflect on. Maybe we shouldn't, but I think I think you will.
I haven't ever told this one publicly, at least not in its full form. I went to a dinner that she gave at Buckingham Palace, and I'd just come back from Bucharest in Romania, which was still then under the control of the pretty appalling dictator Nicolae Ceausescu. And she asked me where I'd been, and I was telling her, and she said, I must tell you something about Ceausescu. The British government of the day, under James Callaghan, Labour government, 1978, rather insisted against her better judgment that she should invite Ceausescu to Buckingham Palace for a state visit. She really didn't want to do that, but you know, it's not her role to tell the Prime Minister who to invite or not. So she did. But she said when it became public knowledge, she got a call from President Giscard d'Estaing of France. And the one thing I should say is that she was a fantastic mimic. And as we just heard President of France say, she spoke lovely French, really good French. And she did this wonderful imitation of Giscard d'Estaing, ringing her up and saying, and it wasn't sort of allo, allo French. It was really good. You know, you must be very careful because this Ceausescu has many security men with him. When we invited him to the Élysée Palace, we put him up in a room with silk Chinese 18th century wallpaper, and the security men ripped it all off to see where we'd put the microphones. And so the Queen said, well, she immediately gave orders that when he came, it was to be in a wood-panelled room that the security men couldn't do. And so she said the following morning, after Ceausescu had spent the night in Buckingham Palace, she looked out of the window, she opened the curtains, maybe somebody opened them for her, and she looked out, and there was Ceausescu with about 10 of his advisors, all huddled like a rugby scrum in the garden, because they were sure that if there weren't microphones in the room, then they were listening to everything he said. And she said, I have to say this, she said, he really was a terrible little man.
Very indiscreet, John. She did have a wonderful sense of humour. Let's just reflect, though, you know, King Charles coming to the throne at the age of 73. She came to the throne at the age of 25. Very different experiences.
Utterly different. I mean, it's really quite a sort of parallel with Victoria and Edward VII, isn't it? And you have to remember that in 1901, when Queen Victoria died, there was actually quite a lot of Republican feeling, and the Queen hadn't always been very popular in her last years. What happened was, and also the Prince of Wales, as he then was, Edward VII, had been also quite unpopular. He'd done all sorts of things which people didn't like. And he just won them round by the strength of his personality, by really, and I mean that must be what King Charles III must be aiming for, that difference. But I have to say, when I do remember the Queen being crowned, I was 8, I think, or 9 or something, how glamorous she was as a young woman, and she came to my school, I remember, in 1959, and we were all just bowled over by it. So I feel like an American president or an African president or a European president when I think about that.
And just thinking of the huge span of her reign, Britain in that time has changed so much, hasn't it? From that sort of post-war imperial power to losing the empire and becoming, you know, some people would say another European democracy.
Well, we are another European democracy, but you have to remember that when the Queen came to power in 1952, we were still reeling from the Second World War. We were still a poverty-stricken country where you could see kids in the streets in London. I saw it myself with no shoes on, where food itself was scarce. We didn't, having orange juice was something which was quite a luxury then. So although, yes, I mean, we were grander in the scale of things in the early 1950s, we're not nearly so grand now and probably better off as a result. But we are infinitely richer than we were. And the Queen has gradually, she has overseen that change in a very, very smooth way. I think that's why everybody, and not just in this country, is going to miss her because of that sense of always being there and always being that kind of glamorous figure in charge of things.
John, great to talk to you. John Simpson, who met the Queen, what, about a dozen times? And
yeah, I altered.
You've lost count.
It's probably 10 times.
John Simpson, our World Affairs editor, thank you very much indeed. We're going to go now to our correspondent, Helena Wilkinson, who's at Windsor Castle. Hiya.
Hi, Ben. Throughout the day, thousands of people have been coming here to Windsor Castle to remember the Queen, to share stories, to pay their respects. Let's just give you a sense of what we are seeing here this afternoon. We're at the top of the Long Walk, the castle end, at Cambridge Gate, and you can see the people still arriving in big numbers. They have been throughout the day. The flowers that have been laid, lots of sunflowers have been left. There are thousands of flowers, bouquets just behind me here. And the notes which I've been reading on some of those flowers that have been left, one of them read, "She represented the best of us." Another simply thanked the Queen for her lifetime of dedication. So the notes really give you a sense, Ben, of the support, devotion that many, many people have felt towards the Queen, and they've wanted to come here to gather together. We've just seen actually a tour guide who is taking people around. The timing of that for those people to be here on such a sad occasion. In terms of what is going to happen later, all of those flowers that have been left, we understand that they will be moved to the grounds, inside the grounds of Windsor Castle, just outside of St George's Chapel, because given how many there are, they will move them later on this evening. And we expect, because they are putting up a number of barriers here in the last 10 minutes or so, along part of the Long Walk, the weekend coming up, and I think they are anticipating a large number of people to continue to come here, because Windsor, of course, was the Queen's beloved home. It was a place where she felt incredibly happy. She spent the last 2.5 years here carrying out royal duties. She, of course, spent lockdown with her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, here. It was a place that she considered her home, and she cared about local issues as well. And I think, having spoken to people, locals here in Windsor, they feel this very deeply. The castle, for those who don't know, is situated right in the town centre, and for residents here, they considered the Queen one of their neighbours. In past years, they would see her driving up and down the Long Walk, so she was very much part of the community. And for residents here to look up at the castle behind me, to recognise and realise that the Queen is not going to be returning to the castle, I think that will take quite some time for them to come to terms with.
Helena, thank you very much. Helena Wilkinson there for us at Windsor. Well, Windsor Castle, like Buckingham Palace, like Balmoral, very much the focal point of national mourning for the Queen at the moment. But her death being felt right across the country. Flowers, for example, being left at churches and cathedrals up and down the land, and tributes to the late Queen. Well, our correspondent Nick Garnett has been to Liverpool to see how people there are remembering her.
At Liverpool's Anglican Cathedral, they've opened not one, but 2 books of remembrance for a monarch who came here 4 times, once as princess, 3 times as queen.
I just think she's been a great servant to this country, given up her whole life selflessly. Many people are ungrateful of that fact.
Thank you for being a great queen and giving up your whole life to serve the country.
For me, it's something that me and my family have always loved about our country is Lizzie, and I've shared that with my nan in particular, who is 92 and is very close to her age.
Her presence is felt across the city, in 2016 opening the city's Children's Hospital.
She was turning 90 and we'd asked if she would come and we weren't quite sure that she would. But we were absolutely thrilled when she came back to us and said she would love to open the new Alder Hey and come to Liverpool and celebrate with the city.
Alder Hey Children's Hospital is just one of the thousands of buildings that Her Majesty opened during her reign. The magic of her, perhaps, though, is that she made every single person she met feel special.
It's just an honour at the time that I was in, and I was chosen to greet her at the door, and you never get that chance, do you, in your lifetime? You never think you're going to get that chance, so just a chance in a million that, she made everyone feel really relaxed and at home. We had all the children round here, all the decorations up, and she just welcomed everyone. She went to speak to all the children, she took an interest in what was wrong with them, and it was just a really nice day.
The bells of the cathedral ring out across a city which welcomed Queen Elizabeth throughout her life, and where she left a lasting mark in stone. Nick Garnett, BBC News, Liverpool.
We're going to go back now to Buckingham Palace. My colleague Joanna Gosling is there, and huge crowds still there, Joanna, as they have been all day. And I suppose mixed emotions, really, because they've come to mourn the Queen, but they also came to welcome the new King, King Charles, and they were there, many of those people behind you, when he arrived with the Queen Consort, and he did what was really a very long kind of walkabout, shaking hands with dozens and dozens of those well-wishers who had gathered at the palace and wanted to shake his hand and wanted to express condolences, but also their good wishes for his reign, and some of them even kissing his hand and handing him flowers.
Yes, and we can see people were holding cameras aloft to remember this moment, this really important moment where the new king had his first direct contact with the people. And as you say, there was a sense that they were looking back and also forwards and passing on their condolences to King Charles III under sunny skies here earlier in the day. And we saw there that when they arrived, Camilla, the Queen Consort, got out of the car first. We then didn't see her while the King walked along greeting the people. It was a sense of this being a moment for him, marking that moment, that transition from Prince Charles, as we have of course known him for so many years, and now we accustom ourselves to calling him King Charles III. And so that was the moment for him in front of the cameras. And then after that, the two of them walked inside Buckingham Palace. The royal standard was elevated to full mast, and he has remained there inside since, and had that first audience with Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister. She was here for about half an hour as they spoke, and she then goes off to St Paul's Cathedral, where there is a service of remembrance. The national anthem will of course be sung at that service, and that will be the first official rendition, I think, of the national anthem, when the words are "God Save the King." We heard it here informally from the crowd earlier, lots and lots of people shouting "God Save the King," and then a small group started to sing the national anthem. So it's felt like a very important interaction between the King and his people. everything is going to be about the ceremony. There is so much that needs to be done. Tomorrow there will be that moment when he is officially described as the king, when there is the accession council tomorrow, when an oath will be sworn, and that will be happening at St James's Palace, which is of course where he resided previously before moving to Clarence House. And now this is obviously the hub effectively of where his office presumably will move to at some point. But you mentioned the crowds, and they come, they keep on coming. There is constant movement of people, some passing through, some staying, some trying to obviously get to the front, where on the gates is the announcement that was posted there after the death of Her Majesty the Queen. So it is a focal point for many as the nation mourns the passing of the Queen and also considers the future with the new king. And we'll be hearing from him directly when he addresses the nation at 6 o'clock tonight.
Yes, and just briefly, Joanna, for those crowds there at the palace, it's an extraordinary historic day because they saw the king arrive. They also saw the new Prime Minister meet the new king, arriving for that audience.
Yeah, and there have been so many historic moments here outside Buckingham Palace, but none like this, where, as you say, we have had in a matter of days a new government and now a new king. And that is perhaps what has drawn so many here. It's a moment of history. It's also a moment of remembrance, and it is the start of the Carolean era.
Joanna, thank you. Just to say, we are in about an hour going to hear from King Charles, who will be making his first televised address to the nation as monarch. You're watching BBC News. Welcome to viewers here in the United Kingdom, across the world and on PBS in America for our special coverage after the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Britain's longest serving monarch died peacefully on Thursday afternoon at the age of 96 at her Scottish estate of Balmoral. The crown immediately passed on to her eldest son and heir, who will be formally proclaimed king on Saturday morning and will reign as Charles III. Well, after spending the night at Balmoral in Scotland, the King, as we have been hearing, is back in London for a series of important engagements. In the last hour, King Charles has had an audience with the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Liz Truss, at Buckingham Palace. He will make his first televised address to the nation as monarch. That's expected in about an hour at around 6 p.m. London time. Now, after that speech, after that address to the nation, a public service of remembrance is going to be held. That is at St Paul's Cathedral in London. The Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, and the Mayor of London are expected to be amongst those, and there will be a congregation of some 2,000 people at that service of remembrance at St Paul's Cathedral. Well, let's go back now to Buckingham Palace. My colleague Joanna Gosling is there for us now. Joanna.
Thank you, Ben. Here at Buckingham Palace today, there's been a real sense of a merging of the business of state and also the very important aspect of the monarch's role, and that is directly connecting with the people. There was that first meeting with the new Prime Minister behind closed doors, and prior to that, directly on arrival at the palace, the new king and the Queen Consort Camilla arrived, stepped out of the car, and then took some time to greet the crowds. And the king appeared relaxed. It was a moment when you can see from these pictures people just wanted to shake his hand. Some wanted to speak to him. They wanted to pass on their condolences. There were shouts of "God save the King" from those in the crowd. There was also a little rendition of the national anthem, and we heard the words changed, of course, from "God save the Queen" to "God save the King." So it has been a moment of people remembering, of paying tribute to the Queen and those extraordinary 70 years of service, and now looking to the future with the new King King Charles III, and there was a sense of him almost enjoying this moment. I think he was relaxed. He was directly in that moment of being with the people, and one of his aides apparently said to some of those in the crowd who were holding their cameras up to record this for posterity, and said, "Put your cameras away. This is a moment to savour and to remember. This is a moment of history. This is the moment that the King arrived back in London and now formally starts that transition from the Prince of Wales, who has known that this moment will come, but nonetheless he is digesting it, as we all are. The passing of his mother, the moment that he now takes the throne. And tomorrow there will be a meeting of the Accession Council. That's going to be a significant moment amongst many in the coming days. That's when an oath will be sworn at St James's Palace, and that will be the first of a number of events that are going to be key in the days ahead, as we, of course, there will be the funeral, the state funeral of the Queen, and then his coronation. But we don't have any dates for these significant moments as they come. For now, we look and we see the King mingling with his people, and we wait to hear from him directly, because at 6 p.m. he is going to be addressing the nation. And it has been an extraordinary week, because it is not just a week in which we see this succession, but there has been a new government, and people have been looking back into history to see whether this has ever happened before. It's hard to think that it might have done. It's certainly extremely rare for it to be the fact that there has been the succession. And just on Tuesday we saw Her Majesty the Queen at Balmoral, which is where she was spending the summer and where she invited Liz Truss to form a new government as Prime Minister. And that photograph that was taken to mark that moment, a poignant photograph, of course, now that we will remember the last official engagement of the Queen, and now the baton passes to King Charles, and he's already had one of his first official moments inside the palace behind me when he greeted Liz Truss. So there she was at Balmoral with his mother, the Queen, and she's been with the new King here at Buckingham Palace today. Ben.
Joanna, thank you. Joanna Gosling there at Buckingham Palace, and Joanna talking about the significance of Balmoral this week. And let's go there now, because Kirsty Wark is at the Queen's estate at Balmoral in Scotland. Kirsty, are there still members of the royal family there? Do we know?
In fact, members of the royal family arrived this afternoon. Sarah Tyndall and Princesses Eugenie and Beatrice arrived this afternoon, and they joined the remaining members of the royal family here. That is the Duke of Wessex and his wife, Sophie, Princess Anne, and indeed Prince Andrew as well. We do not know if the younger ones are staying overnight, but certainly Princess Anne, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward will be staying here overnight. We don't yet know if they're going to be joined by other more distant members of the royal family tomorrow morning.
Kirsty, what are people there? We can see some of them gathered behind you. What is the mood? Obviously, Balmoral has been at the centre of events this week. The death of the Queen, yeah, but before that, as we were just seeing, that the Queen's last act is appointing her 15th Prime Minister.
It is extraordinary to think that only 3 days ago the Queen was working here, and I think we mustn't underestimate the sense of shock in this area. And also, people have been streaming across the bridge very quietly over the River Dee, where the royal family used to fish, through these beautiful woods to pay their respects. You know, people, local people, but people who are here perhaps on holiday from around the world. I spoke to one family from Las Vegas, and there is definitely a feeling, certainly among the Scottish population that is here, is that they are coming to a place where they feel close to the Queen. That there is a great mutual fondness and a great regard for the Queen and a great respect for her. And in fact, they love the fact that she is so close to them. I mean, this is a very rural area, and to have so many thousands of people coming in and going out with these beautiful bouquets of flowers is actually quite extraordinary to see. So I think they don't expect necessarily members of the royal family to come out. They're not even looking for that. They just want to pay their respects and their condolences to somebody who was called the Queen of Scots when the Scottish Parliament opened in 1999. And what they believe is this long affinity with this area is very, very important to them. So in fact, Prince Albert built Balmoral Castle for Queen Victoria in the mid-1800s from granite that was hewn from this estate. So people, the royal family, feel a deep, deep sense of connection, and many of their happiest and indeed saddest times have been here. Because we must remember, of course, that this is where the Queen heard about the death of Princess Diana, Princess of Wales, and she was here with her grandchildren, Prince William and Harry. And this is where she came after the death of Prince Philip, to mourn and to have a peaceful times. But there's also been times of great happiness and fun here. And I think what many people who come here, either heads of state or prime ministers or members of the voluntary community come here, they see a different side of the Queen. They see a side of the Queen that is so relaxed, who wants to go and picnic on a blanket, who wants to make them walk up the hill with her, who wants to show them her beloved horses and wants to fish with them in the River Dee. And I think this was a place of total relaxation and privacy for the royal family, and I think people have a great deal of respect for that right now.
Yeah, Kirsty, certainly Balmoral had a very special place in the Queen's heart, as you've been saying. Thank you so much, Kirsty Wark, there for us at Balmoral. Well, Britain is now in a period of national mourning and royal mourning, and people have been paying their respects to the late Queen all over the land, laying flowers at the palaces, as we have seen, but also at churches and cathedrals up and down the land. With the story of the day, here's Daniel Sandford.
Less than 24 hours after his mother's death, King Charles III had to leave Balmoral Castle to fly to London, where his Rolls-Royce brought him to the gates of Buckingham Palace. There he greeted people who'd come to mourn his mother, the Queen, and now found themselves welcoming the new king. At this moment of transition, the crowd expressing a complex set of emotions, sadness and shock, but also love for the new monarch. His wife, Queen Camilla, had travelled with him to the capital, where this evening he will address the nation. The address will be filmed in the Blue Drawing Room. His first visitor at Buckingham Palace was the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who herself only started in the job 3 days ago. She will be his first Prime Minister, he her second monarch. At noon, bells rang out in abbeys and cathedrals across the country to mark the passing of the UK's longest-serving monarch. Moments later, MPs assembled in Parliament.
Order, order. I invite the House to rise and observe a minute's silence in memory of Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II.
The cut and thrust of political debate silenced. This, a time only for tributes.
Today, our country, our people, this House, are united in mourning. Queen Elizabeth II was this great country's greatest monarch. And for the vast majority of us, it feels impossible to imagine a Britain without her. All our thoughts are with her beloved family, our royal family, at this moment of profound grief.
Today, there are countless people in this country and around the world who have experienced the same sudden access of unexpected emotion. And I think millions of us are trying to understand why we are feeling this deep and personal and almost familial sense of loss. Perhaps it's partly that she's always been there, a changeless human reference point in British life.
The death gun salute was longer than any that has come before. 96 rounds fired, one for each year of her life. In Hyde Park, Edinburgh, Windsor, Gibraltar, Cardiff, Northern Ireland, Stonehenge, Plymouth, Jersey, and at the Tower of London. As people gathered at Buckingham Palace, the Queen's London home, the Premier League announced it was postponing the weekend's fixtures. The last night of the proms has already been cancelled. We are entering a period of royal mourning and national mourning. Among those who were at the palace, 2 Chelsea pensioners who had met the Queen.
Ordinary people she would put at ease, and she just had that wonderful ability to be personable to people.
Precious. As a queen, as a mother, a grandmother and a great-grandmother.
Her death dominates today's front pages of newspapers from around the world in a way that only a few events do in each generation. The country is now preparing for the formal process of marking the passing of the monarch, the lying in state, the funeral, the end of the era of Queen Elizabeth II. Daniel Sandford, BBC News.
And the beginning of the era of King Charles III, who has been at Buckingham Palace. We saw earlier the extraordinary scenes as he met well-wishers there, and he also had an audience with Britain's new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who was asked to form a government only earlier this week by the late Queen Elizabeth. Let's go to our correspondent Leila Nathoo, who's in Downing Street. So a first audience between the new King and the new Prime Minister. Of course, we won't ever know anything about what was said.
Yeah, certainly a significant event, Ben. The first meeting between our new head of state and our new head of government, both new to their positions this week. These weekly meetings between the monarch and her Prime Minister have been taking place throughout the Queen's reign, a chance for the monarch and the Prime Minister to meet in private to discuss government matters in a setting that is entirely private. The Queen, of course, remained politically neutral throughout her reign. King Charles will, as the head of state, remain politically neutral too. But this is a chance to discuss government business and will become a regular appointment, a weekly appointment between King Charles and Liz Truss. It's worth, I think, noting that in the Commons today, where tributes have been paid to the Queen from MPs across the House, Liz Truss, as Prime Minister, led those tributes. But of course, we have 2 former Prime Ministers still in the Commons, now on the back benches, Boris Johnson and Theresa May, both paying their own tributes to the Queen and mention specifically their memories, their fond memories of their weekly audiences with the Queen. So you could see there, get a sense from Theresa May and Boris Johnson about how much those weekly interactions with the Queen meant to them. So we can see now that that King Charles and Liz Truss will adapt to their new roles and hold those weekly meetings and get into their new dynamics, but it will be a regular feature of both of them as they take their new roles.
Leila, we now have this period of national mourning, of course. The new government, the new Prime Minister. To what extent do you think does political life come to a bit of a halt during this period?
Well, you've definitely got the sense here, Ben, in Westminster that there has been a pause on the usual politics that we see here. Certainly the Commons today had a very solemn atmosphere. The chamber was very muted. MPs listened to each other's tributes in near silence. Everyone was wearing dark clothing, and certainly across the parliamentary estate there was a very muted atmosphere. Sir Keir Starmer, in his tribute to the Queen, said that she would have wanted the House to come together at this time. So certainly there has been an abrupt suspension of the usual cut and thrust of politics. Remember, news of the Queen's ill health interrupted a debate over the major policy announcement that Liz Truss, as Prime Minister, was making about energy bills, but that is all on pause very much so for now, and the Commons will be sitting for the rest of today into the evening and tomorrow for tributes to be made by MPs who want to, and certainly there will be no parliamentary business going on in the coming days.
Leila, thank you very much indeed for bringing us up to date from Downing Street. That's Leila Nathoo, our political correspondent. Well, I'm pleased to say we can now talk to the new US Ambassador to London, Jane Hartley. Ambassador, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. We were reflecting that the Queen, I think, had appointed 15 British Prime Ministers, but she also, I think, in her life met 13 sitting American presidents, which is an extraordinary number in her very long reign, and a very good friend to the United States.
She definitely was. First of all, I want to start by offering my condolences to the royal family and really to the people of the UK, and frankly, to many people throughout the world. America, too, adored your Queen, and I've received many emails and texts throughout the day from people saying she truly was an icon. There won't be another one like her in a very long time. She will be sorely missed. Her dignity and her strength, frankly, was quite impressive.
And as I mentioned, you're the new US Ambassador. I think it was in July that you went to Buckingham Palace to present your credentials to Her Majesty, and she appeared live from Windsor Castle on a video link.
That is true. It was in July. It happened to be the hottest day in London history. And the pomp and circumstance of doing this, which you know quite well, we had to change a few things. They were sending the horse and carriage to pick me up, but the day was so hot, it was too hot for the horses. So the Queen so graciously offered to send her car to get me. She was quite amazing in my audience with her. First of all, very substantive, very interested, very much wanted to talk about policy, obviously so knowledgeable. But what really touched me was her warmth. I hadn't been there that long in this country, and she just wanted to make sure, she said, is London making you feel welcome? How is Winfield House? Just so caring and quite personal. At one point I told her I had brought my dog, and she just lit up. She thought that was wonderful. But she was really an amazing human being, substantive, a huge sense of duty, but so warm, so warm, and a great sense of humor, I might say, as well.
We've just been looking at some pictures of her meeting various American presidents, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and so on.
Yeah.
And I know for them, because they've said it, meeting the Queen was one of the real highlights, one of the real pinnacles of their careers. These were men, the most powerful men in the world, and yet to meet the Queen was the absolute summit of their careers in many ways.
I've talked to a few, and specifically I've talked to President Obama and Michelle about this a couple summers ago. And I think you're absolutely right. It was the summit, and they too spoke of not just how dignified she was, which she was, and how warm she was, but how she cared about them. And if you talk to both of them, and even particularly Michelle, there was an affection and a fondness there. And I think many government leaders are quite heartbroken right now, including our president, Joe Biden, and his wife, Jill, who also adored the Queen. And, if anybody understands what service and duty are, and the Queen really exemplified that, that is also Joe Biden.
Because in this country, of course, she is being mourned as a British monarch who reigned for so long, but she was a global figure, a global icon for so many decades as well, and in America as well. I mean, apart from all the presidents, but so many Americans really loved the British Queen.
Oh, Americans loved her, and I want to say, just speaking personally, I'm the second woman to be ambassador to the Court of St. James. The first was about 50 years ago. And watching the Queen and knowing that she's played this role on the world stage for 70 years. And 70 years ago, when there really were not that many women as world leaders, she was just an incredible, incredible role model for so many of us.
And she came to the throne at the age of 25, and Britain changed so much, didn't it, in the time of her reign, in the decades, the long decades of her reign?
It changed so much, and I think she herself went through so much, but she was always, you know, a beacon of hope and to some extent optimism for the country. I remember even most recently during the pandemic, listening to her talk to the people. It was really quite incredible. But what touched me the most, and actually brought me to tears, frankly, this week, was that her sense of duty, her sense of responsibility to this country she loved so much, that even 2-3 days ago, I guess now, she met with Liz Truss to ask her to form a new government. I mean, that is duty and responsibility.
And now, of course, the new era of King Charles III. What is America thinking about that, if I may ask you?
Oh, America is looking forward to working with the King. You know, in my view, the King has the same sense of duty, same sense of responsibility, is also, as we say in America, a class act. And I don't think anything will change in our special relationship.
And it is a special relationship that the royal family, in your view, has been a real part in maintaining down the years.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, quite important. You know, as you say, I think she has met or did meet with every U.S. president, except I think for LBJ, and LBJ probably wishes he had met her. Wished he had met her. No, she's quite important, and you know, her beliefs and her value system and her caring about democracy and freedom and humanitarian values, that was important for our government. It's important for our people.
And last question, are we expecting President Biden to come to the funeral of the Queen?
Well, you know, I never get ahead of the White House on scheduling announcements, but what I would say, I know both President Biden, I know Dr. Biden, they truly adored the Queen, and once again, back to what I said, her commitment to service, her commitment to duty, her commitment to this country for 70 years, that is something that totally resonates with President Biden.
Thank you so much. Ambassador Jane Hartley, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
You're watching BBC News. Now I want to bring in our correspondent Helena Wilkinson, who's at the royal residence at Windsor Castle. Helena.
Well, Ben, this afternoon the crowds of people are still coming here to Windsor Castle. Of course, the castle was the Queen's main residence over the past couple of years or so, and it was a place she was incredibly happy. She loved being in Windsor. She felt it was her home. She felt very relaxed here, and she had a deep connection with the town. And you walk through the town centre and there are lots of pictures of Her Majesty in many of the shop windows throughout the town. We are positioned at the top of the Long Walk at the castle end of the Long Walk. You can see Cambridge Gate just behind us. Lots of people still arriving. They have been in their thousands throughout the day. Let's just give you a sense of what we are looking at around us here. You can see, again, crowds of people are still arriving. Many of them coming to have a look, to share stories about Her Majesty the Queen, leaving flowers, bouquets of flowers. You might be able to just make out some of those flowers over there. In fact, there are so many flowers that have been left just by Cambridge Gate that they are having to put up some barriers, you might be able to see just over there, because there isn't enough room for those flowers anymore outside Cambridge Gate. Just to read you some of the notes that have been left on some of the flowers. I was reading some of them earlier on. And some very simple notes, but just underlines the admiration, the respect that so many people held for Her Majesty the Queen. One of those cards read, "We'll never forget your beautiful smile and kind heart. You are a true lady." Another one which I read said, "Thank you for all you have done. You are an inspiration." And another card, "You were the glue that united us all together." The flowers, the bouquets of flowers that have been left here a bit later on, they are going to be moved, and that will happen every evening just because of the sheer number of bouquets. They will be moved to inside the castle grounds, just outside St George's Chapel on Castle Chapter grass, and that is where they're going to be moved to. Locals here, as I mentioned, the Queen had a deep affection for this town. She cared about the issues. And you speak to locals, they feel a deep sense of loss here. They have lived here with the castle in the centre of Windsor. When they've gone about their daily business, shopping, they glance up at the castle knowing that the Queen is there. They will now look up, and it will take them some time to come to the realisation that the Queen will no longer be returning to this castle. And they really saw her not just as the Queen, but as their neighbour. So lots of people still coming here this evening. We've seen a lot of school children, many of them carrying flowers, white roses in their hands, being brought by their parents and other people finishing work, coming to have a look and share their stories about the Queen. And I think they are anticipating, given the barriers that have been put up in the last hour or so along parts of the Long Walk, I think this weekend they are anticipating big numbers here at Windsor Castle. Ben.
Helena, thank you very much, Helena Wilkinson, for us there at Windsor. Well, across the globe, world leaders have been paying their heartfelt tributes to the Queen. The French President, Emmanuel Macron, said, "We all feel an emptiness after her death." The President of the United States, Joe Biden, said the Queen had defined an era. Our diplomatic correspondent, Caroline Hawley, has this report.
Please join in a moment of silence in the memory of Queen Elizabeth.
Across continents, people paused their lives to mark the moment and pay their respects. This was the opening match of the season for America's National Football League in Los Angeles. On the other side of the country, sport stopped too for Queen Elizabeth at the semi-finals of the US Open in New York. She was the most travelled monarch in history. Among her myriad meetings with international politicians here and abroad were as many as 12 US presidents.
I had the opportunity to meet her before she passed, and she was an incredibly gracious and decent woman. And the thoughts and prayers of the American people are with the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth in their grief.
She was a curious, highly intelligent person who really wanted to learn what you knew and how it would fit into the world.
She played an extraordinary role navigating the world stage for decades, never a foot put wrong, as she met a wide range of people, from politicians to popes. Pope Francis paid tribute to her life of unstinting service to the good of the nation and the Commonwealth, her example of devotion to duty. She remained head of state of 15 countries, including Jamaica, which she visited 6 times during her reign. But even here, where Republican sentiment is now strong, she has plenty of admirers as a person.
She loves black people, so we're going to miss her because she loves Jamaica too. So from time to time she come here and think I'm kind of respect for what she do for black people.
So many persons feel as if, you know, the passing might not affect them personally, but for me, just on a whole, knowing about history and like love watching those royal shows, it is really disheartening to learn about the passing of Queen Elizabeth.
And the outpouring of admiration came from countries far and near, politicians and ordinary people voicing their thoughts today.
Her death is always sad. She was a monarch that made history, not only in the Commonwealth, but in the whole world.
President Macron of France today signed the condolence book and then directly addressed the people of Britain.
Elizabeth II mastered our language, loved our culture, and touched our hearts. shared not just an entente cordiale, but a warm, sincere, and loyal partnership. To you, she was your queen. To us, she was the queen.
Last night, this Paris landmark turned off its lights in a show of respect. And this was the famous Sydney Opera House, which the Queen opened in 1973, lit up to honour a remarkable royal diplomat and stateswoman. Caroline Hawley, BBC News.
Now, we've been finding out during the day that sporting events across Britain have been cancelled or postponed after the death of the Queen. And Matt Graveling can join me now with the latest details from the BBC Sports Centre. Matt, let's just start off with football and a pretty universal set of postponements this weekend.
Well, that's correct, Ben. Yes, all football has now been called off this weekend at all levels. We've had a series of statements throughout the day, all with a similar message, it's fair to say, saying that these games have been postponed as a mark of respect. And as I say, it really is at all levels across the home nations, from grassroots right up until the Premier League and the Women's Super League. Now, Ben, of course, last night, just hours after the announcement of the Queen's passing, we did see Manchester United and West Ham playing in Europe. We understand that this decision was taken following direction from the Football Association and UEFA. The decision has taken a few people by surprise, and Ben, I believe this is because at around 10 o'clock this morning, the government said that they were giving individual organisations the freedom to decide whether to postpone the events, and many people assumed football therefore would go ahead, especially when you consider that there's already a very congested fixture list and football has a World Cup this winter. But as I say, all games have been postponed this weekend, and it's been met with some criticism online from people on social media and also the Football Supporters Association, because while the government has suggested a minute's silence or the national anthem, people have been saying this is an opportunity missed, as a better tribute would have been to hear football stadiums full of people applauding the Queen's life and singing God Save the King in the national anthem.
Matt, just tell us what is happening in terms of horse racing as well, the sport so beloved of the Queen. What is happening with that?
Well, that's right, Ben. We've seen so many beautiful pictures, haven't we, of the Queen at the races, and horse racing was stopped yesterday as we got news of the Queen's poor health. It was off again today and it will also be off again tomorrow. But we have had a statement from the British Horse Racing Authority confirming that racing will return on Sunday at Doncaster with 9 races. Now, Ben, this includes the St Leger Stakes, and this is a race the Queen won with her filly Dunfermline in 1977. So some good news for people who want to pay their respects at the horse racing on Sunday.
Matt, thank you very much indeed. Matt Graveling. Now, I just want to tell you that in a few minutes' time, there is a service of remembrance at St Paul's Cathedral. This is the scene at Buckingham Palace, where there have been huge crowds all day, actually. And there we can see from our helicopter shot just some of the people who've been there, many of them there all day, actually, and coming to pay their respects to Her Majesty the Queen, but also coming to welcome, a few hours ago, the King, King Charles III. And there was an extraordinary moment when he arrived with the Queen Consort Camilla, and they both stepped out of their car before it could take them through the gates into Buckingham Palace. They stepped out and they spent quite a few minutes meeting well-wishers there. And let's talk to Joanna Gosling, my colleague, who's at Buckingham Palace. And you're there with some of those people who've been congregating around the palace all day today.
Yeah, and I'd like to show you actually the scene, because I mean we are in the thick of an enormous group of people, as you would expect, everywhere that you look. And there's just been a bit of a flurry of excitement here actually, because a car bearing the royal insignia left. There were obviously police escort vehicles, and we've been speaking to people. I didn't see it directly myself, but the people who were close up say that King Charles and Camilla left the palace and they were in that car, so we're not clear exactly as to where they were headed, whether they're going to the service at St Paul's, but it does seem that they have now left the palace. It's not long now until we hear from King Charles when he addresses the nation, but you mentioned, I mean, people have come from all around the world here, and it's a very respectful, quiet, not sombre, but a very nice atmosphere down here, with people leaving flowers at the gates, flowers around the fountain, and those flowers, we understand, will be moved every 12 hours because the flowers will, of course, keep on coming. It's in remembrance of the Queen, and so many people want to come here as the focal point to pay their respects. And also, we saw earlier how much warmth was shown to King Charles III when he greeted the crowds, and there were many shouts of "God save the King." So I'm joined here by two guests, Laura and Angelica. Angelica is 11, and Angelica, I see you've got some flowers there that you want to lay by the gates of the palace. Why is it important for you to be here today?
Well, I go to a school called Queen's College. I've recently started, and the patron is the Queen, so she really means a lot to me.
And you've only just started, so it's been...
She patroned my school for only 4 days, sadly, but better than nothing.
What were people saying today at school or this week?
They were just saying, like, stuff about the Queen. We had a special assembly for her, because she's very important to our school.
Of course. And you've got a little message, I know, that you've written on your flowers. Would you mind telling us what the message says?
Yes. I wrote, "Dear Queen Elizabeth, we all mourn for our loss, but we all know that you ruled this country wonderfully. You made us all happy every day. I always wished one day I would be able to see you, but you will always be in my heart. And guess what? I went to Queen's College. We will all miss you loads. Lots of love, Angelica."
That's really lovely, Angelica. And because you're 11, you're going to obviously have the memories of the Queen, and you'll grow up with the King. And why was it important, Laura, for you to come here today?
I'm from Italy, and I've been here 20 years, and I recently became a British citizen. And I've always been following the royal and see other episodes that are happening in their life, like the marriages and everything. So I've been here long enough, and then I feel that it's part of my country now as well.
And it's such a moment of history, and for you and Angelica.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm born with the Queen, and then I knew the Queen all of my life, and it's a bit of a change for many people. Absolutely.
Thank you very much. I'll leave you to go and lay your flowers. Thank you.
Thank you.
And there are young children here who, unlike many of us who have only known a queen, because of course the Queen has been on the throne for 70 years, and we're getting used to hearing God save the King. There are kids here who are young, who will grow up now only knowing the King, and there are people here of all ages, young and old. It's a constant flow of people. They've been here in the rain, they've been here in the sun. The sun was out earlier when King Charles was greeting the members of the crowd, but after that the heavens have opened, the umbrellas just go up, the people don't go away, and they just keep on coming.
Yeah, and what was extraordinary when I was down there a bit earlier on and the King was arriving was that just as his car arrived, the Union flag, which had been flying at half-mast, that was replaced by the Royal Standard, not at half-mast, but there it is, you can see it flying now. And that, of course, flies when the monarch is in residence, and he hadn't actually set foot in the residence. He had just got out of his car, I think, when it was raised, and got out of his car and started that very long walkabout. And I suppose, Joanna, just to reflect on that walkabout, he's done so many in his life as heir to the throne, but this was the first as the monarch, as the king, and it felt very different, didn't it?
It did. It was that moment of a direct connection with his people, and so much of what's going to be happening in the days and weeks ahead are about ceremony, are about the transition, the formal transition, but in the end the monarch is there for the people. It was something that was very important to the Queen, and that connection is absolutely on full display as people remember her, remember what she meant to them over the 70 years, the feeling of that connection with her. And it did feel like that moment when he was there directly talking to people. He was smiling, he was relaxed, he was savouring the moment, perhaps, as he walked the full length of the width of Buckingham Palace from left to right, stopping and talking to people, shaking their hands. Some kissed his hands, people were shouting, "God save the King," and it did feel like a key moment, and we're going to see many of them. And as you mentioned, that moment when the royal standard was at full mast. Every moment that unfolds in the coming days are moments of history as we transition from the Elizabethan age to the Carolean age.
Yes, an extraordinary moment in British history. Joanna, thank you very much indeed. And just to say that the service at St Paul's Cathedral is going to be beginning very shortly. Service of remembrance for the Queen's long life spent in the service of her country. The service at St Paul's Cathedral, 2,000 members of the public will be attending, along with the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, and the Dean Designate is expected to say, "We remember the Queen's long life spent in the service of this country and of her Commonwealth realms around the world." We can hear the bells ringing just ahead of that service at St Paul's Cathedral to remember the life of Queen Elizabeth. We'll say goodbye to viewers now on BBC One. Let's go live to St Paul's Cathedral.